All right. Push one in the chat if you can hear me. All right, got a confirmation from the chat. Thank you for the confirmation. Welcome back to the Black Brain Trust. This is Black Tech Talk, episode 565. Please hit the like button as you come in, share the video if possible, and hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust, those posted on the community tab. There'll be a docket in the description beneath the video for you to follow along with. If you want to engage in this discussion, there'll be a link in the chat for you to click on. When you click on the link, make sure you raise your hand so that one of us can acknowledge you and advance you to the panel. Just as an FYI, we're still doing IT mentorship. If you're trying to get into IT for the first time, we offer mentorship in that area. If you're trying to go from one IT role to another, we offer IT coaching. If you have any questions about cover letters, resumes, salaries, and wages, we offer advice in that area. If you're a skilled IT professional and you're looking for IT contract work in the tri-state area, Nagone 11 does have recs on the table. Okay. We give a shout out to the people who showed up first. Willie Bean, good afternoon to you, bro. Ronald T. Fowler Jr., peace to you. King Nick, peace. Third Ward, what it do, what it do. Shing Shang, peace to you. Kill Deuce, what up? Let me answer the question in the chat real quick. Ronald T asked a question. He says, I know that now CERT can guarantee me a job, but is CompTIA Cloud Plus in demand? So CompTIA Cloud Plus is more, not so much about getting you a job, but it's a benchmark for your knowledge on cloud. If you have a pretty sufficient knowledge on cloud computing, you should be able to pass that certification. And so you use that certification in conjunction with other things, not just one thing alone. Okay, it's in conjunction with other things. Whether you have a CCNA or a Network Plus or something like that, it's always in conjunction with something else. It's never a standalone. So it depends on what the what the job position is requiring, what the requisites are, the prerequisites are. Yeah, Willie Beeman says CompTIA Cloud Plus is a good start, but I suggest CCSK or CCSP if you really want to get noticed. Yeah, the thing is, CCSK, CCSP are both security certs. And so what's happening here is that if you want to get into cloud security, those are the two certs you go after, but there's a lot going on in cloud beyond security. What's really popping in cloud is cloud compute. Can you build, one, can you build cloud infrastructure out? And two, AI, machine learning, deep learning, DevOps, those are really the things that that's really popping in cloud. Security is always going to be security. So it's not, unless you plan on going into cloud security just as a niche factor, I would say stay away from CCSK and CCSP because it kind of boxes you in to one area and that's it. Okay. AI, blockchain, machine learning, big data, those are things in cloud that are really, really hot right now. Don't get me wrong, cybersecurity is big too, but it's not, it's on the waning side of those previously mentioned areas of expertise that's being looked out for right now. The two hottest things right now in cloud are AI and blockchain. Two of the hottest right now. I mean, we covered an article earlier this week that talked about, blockchain developers making 150, 200K right out of the gate. Okay, that's really hot right now. Security is always going to be security. It's always going to be needed, but it's not really hot in comparison to those previous two. Many companies already have um, a security organization within it, but they don't have AI and blockchain, and that's what they're missing. That's what they're missing big time right now. AI, machine learning, um, big data analytics, data science. Those are the areas that they're trying to fulfill. And so I would say if you're trying to get into cloud, you can get your cloud plus, but make sure it's in conjunction with something else. If you want to get your cloud plus, make sure it's like, you have something additional like the ability to write Python or something like that, code in Python. That cloud plus is usually like is like the A plus for cloud. Okay. It's a knowledge exam. It's not an expertise exam. Okay. Third Ward said, notice how niggas will fill up the chat room for fuck shit content, but when it's some real shit being talked about, you can barely get 100 people in here. Yeah, that's true. That's always been the case, Third Ward. That's always been the case. And we're okay with that. Okay. If we look at the analytics, right, there's probably 100 male content creators in the manosphere. And they usually can break 100 plus 200, 300 people into a chat. And that's fine, right? Because people come there for entertainment. But if we can get 5 to 10%, right, that's of that demographic, then that's exactly where we're supposed to be at. Okay. That's exactly where we're supposed to be at. Because your talented 10th, right? Your 10th percentile of people, 5 to 10% of people in a community that's going to help move it is just that. It's that 5 to 10%. So we're not looking for 500 to 1,000 people to be in here. That's something we accepted a few years ago. That's going to be the extent of this channel. When we designed the channel, we had initially designed it for 500 people. So we only expected 500 subscribers at the time. And we ended up breaking 1,000, and then we went from 1,000 to 1,500 to 2,000 to 2,500 to where we are right now at 3,500. So I think that's normal for this space. So I wouldn't get so worked up and put and concentrate on that so much. I think that's pretty normal here. Because people watch the playback, and that's really important part that we put the content out. Yeah, Third Ward, man. Yeah, he says, don't get me wrong. I like entertainment and watching fun shit too, but I also like intellectual shit as well. You gotta have a balance. Yeah, it's hard, man. It's hard, man. Guys, it's kind of similar to the guys who work out, man, and they just want to walk around in tight white t-shirts, man, with their belly out, man, after they hit a few reps on the bars, man. Then they want to walk around in tight t-shirts, man. Don't really want to change their diet. Still out there rocking pizza, eating pizza and steak and cheese, big Philly steak and cheese subs and stuff like that, man. Got their stomach all bloated. Well, yeah, let me get started because I think that I got a Juneteenth event to go to at 4 o'clock, so I'll have to have a hard stop at around 3:30, 3:45. And so let me get started. Actually, let me drop the link in the chat because I know some people want to get on. Yeah, and pardon the noise in the background. Everybody's out there revving it up. So let me close the windows. All right, first item on the docket is from TechCrunch.com. Tech companies just found out about Juneteenth, and this is what they are doing. This is interesting. We just got finished talking about this. In light of police killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Tony McDade, and Rashard Brooks, as well as the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, Juneteenth has quickly made its way onto the radar of tech companies. On June 19, 1865, slaves in Galveston, Texas, became aware of their freedom. This was about 2 months after the Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered in Virginia, and more than 2.5 years after President President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. In the last couple of weeks, many tech companies have announced plans to make Juneteenth an official holiday for employees or recognize the date in some other way. Jack Dorsey, CEO of Square and Twitter, was the first major tech CEO to announce that Juneteenth would be a paid holiday for employees. Since then, companies like Facebook, Google, Amazon, Uber, and Lyft have announced their own respective plans to commemorate the day. Today, Lyft announced its plans to host a Juneteenth panel about the importance of Juneteenth and share a Juneteenth-like bike route map via City Bike. This is in addition to giving employees the day off. Okay. I'm not going to read all of these, what some of these companies are doing. Oh, actually, let me read this last one. Today, Facebook announced it would spend at least $100 million annually with Black-owned suppliers. That's interesting. That's a lot of money to spend. Okay. Instead, as Hustle Crew founder Abadesi has said, tech companies need to go beyond one-off actions and form habits around racial justice work, forming habits around hiring Black people, promoting Black employees, and paying Black employees fairly, funding Black founders, and making room for Black people in leadership positions is what will lead to concrete change in this industry. Okay, I agree with this. Okay, I think what's happening here is that I think what's happening here is that this regime change that is happening before our own eyes, man, this is like the collapse of the Soviet Union, okay? 1991 was a collapse of the Soviet Union. I mean, in 1989, they saw the writing on the wall, and then 2 years later, that was it, okay? We don't know what can happen now to all of this. We see companies scrambling and whatnot, but this is not just gonna go away overnight. This is something that's gonna be remembered for the next 100 years, that the collapse of cultural and institutional white supremacy went on being challenged in the year 2020, and that the beneficiaries of racial injustice are shaking in their boots right now. Okay, everybody who has a business is shaking in their boots for the most part. So. All right, let me jump to the next item on the docket. All right, next item on the docket is from Business Insider. Diversity and inclusion are the emptiest words in corporate America. Here's what really what we really need to dismantle systemic racism in the office. It should be interesting. About a week after the killing of George Floyd, LinkedIn's newly appointed CEO, Ryan Roslansky, held a virtual town hall style meeting with workers to discuss racial inequality in America. What should have been a proactive discussion quickly turned into an airing of racist sentiments as anonymous comments popped up throughout the video meeting. As a non-minority, all this talk makes me feel like I'm supposed to feel guilty of my skin color, one unidentified commenter wrote. The Daily Beast reported, I feel like I should let someone less qualified fill my position. Is that okay? It appears that I am a prisoner of my birth. This is not what Martin Luther King Jr. would have wanted for anyone. Roslansky called the comments appalling in a letter sent to staff the next day. He also acknowledged the social media giant still had to do a lot of work to create a culture that is truly anti-racist. By raising voices, democratizing access to learning and jobs, and tackling the systems of economic injustice, we can and will make meaningful change, he wrote. For any of this to happen, we have to start with our culture and commit to working through hard things together. Not directly mentioned in the letter, LinkedIn already has someone responsible for making its culture more inclusive. Rosanna Duruthi has been the company's vice president of global diversity, inclusion, and belonging since 2017. She's become such a visible champion for change within LinkedIn that Business Insider named her one of the most influential executives fighting inequality in the corporate world. Companies have been relying on leaders like Duruthi to shoulder the responsibility of creating more inclusive cultures for years. The mounting pressure on corporate America to address inequality has led to a surge in leadership roles with the express mission of pushing those efforts. Postings for diversity and inclusion roles saw a 36% spike from 2016 to 2018, according to the job site Indeed. In 2019, according to Strategy Plus Business, 234 of the S&P 500 companies had diversity professionals, nearly 2/3 of whom had started their jobs within the past 3 years. But as events at LinkedIn and other prominent companies across the US indicate, corporate America's diversity and inclusion strategy has failed to deliver on its name. As the news cycle has shown every single day this month, American business is neither diverse nor inclusive. To understand why, Business Insider spoke with prominent scholars, reviewed research, and analyzed recent conversations with diversity leads at major companies who are themselves often given an impossible task. Right now, all of the orchestration, the coming up with an idea, and the execution of the convening are falling on the shoulders of one diversity leader in the company. Stephanie J. Query, an assistant professor of management at the Wharton School, told Business Insider, honestly, that's why things fail, she said, because one person cannot carry the load of deep inequalities at work, or inequities at work. Companies treat D&I like a side hustle for which only the HR department is responsible, said Christy Glass, a sociologist at Utah State University who studies the factors that shape the careers of professionals of color. She compared it to police reform. Police departments are treating incidences of police brutality as problems of bad apples as opposed to a systemic problem of policing, Glass said. Companies are doing the same thing. Of course, the struggle to diversify the workplace isn't new. Fortune 500 companies spend an estimated $16 billion a year into hiring overall. Inclusion trainings have been around for more than 50 years. A still widely reported 2003 figure that put the annual spend on diversity efforts at $8 billion. Yet those investments are likely to going into the wrong places, like, say, the unconscious bias seminars that have become a fixture of corporate life, though the data says they have mixed results. I don't necessarily think that money is being spent on diversity and inclusion initiatives. Villanova University management professor Cornetta Robertson, a highly cited researcher, said. It's being spent on standalone training and workshop. It's difficult to think how a 1 hour training would be able to create meaningful change. It has to be much more systemic. Matters of diversity and inclusion have acquired heightened urgency following George Floyd's death as America's reckoning with racism has reverberated from his public square into professional life. And despite any number of diversity awards and best of lists, the majority of corporate U.S. workforce is still thoroughly white. In a 2018 analysis of decades of employment data, Harvard and Stanford researchers found that private sector companies were more segregated now than they were 40 years ago. The gap is glaring in the C-suite, with the number of Black Fortune 500 CEOs accountable on one hand and none of them women. Even companies that have received recognition for their diversity efforts report low percentages of Black employees and other people of color, Incorporated reported. For example, CareerSite comparably has ranked some of the tech giants as the most diverse companies in the U.S. yet as of last year. Black employees made up only about 4% of each of Google, Microsoft, and Facebook's workforce. LinkedIn reported 3.5%. Yet, if a Black or non-white employee does land a leadership role, they are often held to a higher standard than their white colleagues or forced to behave like them. In one study, Glass and her research partner, Allison Cook, also of Utah State, analyzed 15 years of CEO transitions within the Fortune 500. They found that white women and people of color were more likely to be promoted to CEO of weakly performing companies, and then, if weak performance continued, they'd be more likely to be replaced by white men. They found a parallel pattern in NCAA men's basketball. Losing teams were more likely to give a chance to a Black head coach and then more likely to replace them with a white coach if things didn't go well. For a study published in May, Glass and Cook did 32 in-depth interviews with white women and people of color who made it to the executive class within large companies. The researchers found that these minoritized professionals had to do performative contortions to follow the unwritten rule book of these elite management settings, hiding their physical presence, like a tall Black male executive who made sure to get to meetings early so that he could greet colleagues while seated and thus not intimidate them. This is very true. This is very true. They also paid extra attention to their voices, like the first generation Latina exec who scrutinized every word in speeches she made to de-emphasize her accent. Very true. If you sound different, the researchers quote her as saying you're less intelligent. These are not things a day-long seminar can address. Business Insider has reviewed executives' recent statements about D&I. We analyzed 27 CEO memos following Floyd's death, and separately, we solicited action plans from CEOs from 24 companies about how they were addressing diversity and equality. Key trends included enabling self-education, creating spaces for open dialogues, making donations, setting and holding to goals, and trying to address bias in hiring. As elsewhere in business, it's largely a matter of turning plans and data into action. Consider Salesforce, which consistently places high on Fortune's list of best workplaces for diversity. Tony Profit, the software company's chief equality officer, told Business Insider that team leaders were given a scorecard every 30 days to track how often they promote and hire women and underrepresented minorities. A third of the 45,000 person global workforce is female, yet Salesforce is still lacking Black and Latino representation, 3% and 4% of the workforce respectively. And within the fiscal 2019, half the company, 12,320 hires were women or underrepresented minorities. The company has also publicly shared annual updates on diversity since 2014. You can read the latest here. When Business Insider inquired for this story, Salesforce said, among other things, that it recently set a company goal of having half of U.S. workforce made up of underrepresented groups: women, Black, Latina, Indigenous, multiracial, LGBTQ, um, people with disabilities, and veterans by 2023. Um, I'm not going to read any further than that. Actually, let me read this paragraph here because I think this is kind of important here. The experts we spoke with agreed that the more challenging work that companies must begin is rooting out systemic racism, which Utah states Glass said is nearly invisible. It's often hard for companies to identify it in their daily practices, but there are steps employers can proactively take to change the culture. Creating those open spaces for dialogue is helpful in as is surveying employees to see how they are feeling. Besides diversifying decision-making bodies like boards and executive teams, employers need to use these employees and their ideas to help make the company better. It's not important to just have members of specific groups represented, but to use their talents and capabilities to enhance the work of the organization. I'm not going to read any more of this because I think we pretty much understand what's happening here. But we do have Renaissance Man on the panel.
Hey, what's up, Mike?
Much, bro.
Yeah, no, lot to unpack in that article. One thing that I've always thought about, and I kind of elaborated on this when I was on the panel the other week. Diversity and inclusion and having diversity in your workforce drives performance, makes for a better company, a better performance. So, in my opinion, until you're not going to see major change, in my opinion, until these metrics are put into executives' performance. Yearly performance, in the sense of with executives at our company, they are driven by hitting financial numbers, cash per share or free cash flow, orders, sales, and cash, as well as stock price. Until this type of stuff becomes a metric, I think it's going to be hard to get systemic change. And part of it could be generational too, just in the sense of like our CEO just left, and I believe she was 65, 66. So you still have that generation of people who still very much grew up in that very white, homogenous America that are in charge of the company. So hopefully with a change and generation of new people coming up through the ranks, you'll see some of that change. But like I said, I think you're also going to have to have these measurements put in people's performance evaluations.
It should be publicly available. I agree with you. It should be publicly available. Like, you shouldn't be able to say, how many women you have on staff, but you don't say how many African Americans you have on staff, especially in places like DC or even Boston for that matter, places that have large demographics of Black people. You would never know that the company has any of those Black people working there because all you see is white faces there.
Yeah. No, it's funny too about those discussions that companies been having, because I actually got an email this past week from leadership at my company saying that they were going to have a discussion about racial inequality. They didn't really elaborate. They just said, there'll be more details given as the time gets closer. But they've done diversity and inclusion training, and I've seen how my colleagues who are white, how they've reacted to it, and it hasn't been the best. And this is just around like a pretty basic discussion. I know also they've done, I don't know if you've seen the video on YouTube where like they'll basically have a race set up, and basically someone will call out like, did you attend a private school, or are both your parents married, or did you have an inheritance, or did both your parents go to college, all these things. And for each one of those things, they'll have you step forward and they'll just show the disparities of how people have all these things, and just the disparities between the races. They actually did that in my company for the first time, and I heard it was a little bit contentious even with that. So
yeah, a lot of your corporate rollout or at least demographic makeup and leadership is reflective of the political climate too. And so you started seeing these big transitions for like Black and other groups of people to be in leadership positions, or at least at the forefront of companies, publicly traded companies, when Obama came into office. Okay. In Massachusetts, the first Black governor was Deval Patrick. And so, you know, that came at the apex of Obama.
And didn't y'all have like it was Edward Burke, I believe?
Ed Burke?
Yeah, was the first like Black senator in like a long time out of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was in like the 60s, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, but that's the thing, right? I think like I said before, the political leadership or the organization's representation is usually based on the political climate and leadership within any region. And so what you see now is that a lot of companies that tech companies are mostly liberal. They're never really conservative. And so I think what's happening here is that tech companies are exercising their liberal nature, or at least the liberal culture, in the face of the political leadership right now. Okay. At first, they may have felt they didn't want to rock the boat. It really wasn't politically expedient for them at the time. But now, if you're a publicly traded company, it would be suicide for you not to say something at this point or not to make a move. During the process. It's just almost that simple. We got Complex on the panel as well.
Yeah, no, you're definitely right. It's crazy how times have changed. I don't know what's driving this one to stick, but it feels different as far as the shift. And I also wonder too, when you start looking at the geopolitical environment, when you start looking at the rise of China, even Africa, there's an article in The Economist talking about how Africa was going to play a major role in world affairs from now going forward. So you wonder how much of that is the realization too of, hey, you know, if America is going to be competitive, you can't have this systemic oppressive environment. You're going to need everyone competing.
Man, we've been speaking to this point since we became the Brain Trust. Right, like the whole theme of everything we've been talking about is looking at Africa as a centerpiece, right? And as largely as brothers here in the States, ADOS and across the board, right? Melanated brothers. What's our role, right? In the affairs to come. And we're really, I don't know, man. We're really just kind of seeing a multitude of things taking shape all at once, you know. But I think that a lot of these tech firms see that basically we will have to become integral parts of infrastructure here in order for us to be competitive on a global scale. Because if I'll tell you like this, you know, just to kind of give you some insights as to what kind of potential power we could wield. I mean, you think if we actually just went on our own, right, as sort of like a tech sphere, and then started doing business internationally, right? That's largely freezing these other companies out of a lot of the international exchange, because see, the optics right now in the United States doesn't look good globally. And you know, there's a lot of companies taking a very pro BLM stance, you know, to maybe sort of ward off the effects of, you know, possible sanctions and stuff like that. So there's a political play here that if we're savvy and we're smart enough, we could play it to our advantage.
Yeah. Pan-Africanism is happening in your face right now.
So I mean, bro, the whole kente cloth thing draped around Pelosi and all of them taking a knee. I'm like, nigga, what am I looking at?
Well, that's different. That's separate. But Pan-Africanism, in the sense that it's unifying Black people on a global scale in solidarity with each other based on an action that happened last month.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So that's Pan-Africanism, not what Pelosi is doing. But
Oh, okay. I was gonna say because that shit even on its own, I'm like, yo, what am I looking at?
well, that's
I follow what you're saying. Yeah.
yeah, that's separate. But America has always been labeled as a melting pot of different groups of people. How can you have a country that's supposed to be a melting pot with no representation of that melting pot within your demographics of an organization? If you're publicly traded, if you're a privately traded company, you don't really have to disclose a lot of things.
Yeah.
But if you're a publicly traded company, it's suicide to actually have not said anything in the last 30 days based on what's been happening. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, even if you're not publicly traded, I've been blown away just by all these news stories of people getting outed. A CEO, one guy was talking about, he was donating money to Black Lives Matter, and this other CEO of like this security company wrote him a note and said, why are you getting involved in this stuff? You could spend more time to stop these young people from killing each other and this and that. And he aired it out, and the guy, is literally apologizing, trying to pretty much keep his job. And this is a small private company, so it's everywhere, really.
Yeah, yeah. Especially, we talk about the Pan-Africanist piece. We also talk about what happened in China with the Africans and how fast, that got responded to. How fast China got out at the forefront of that, right? China got out the forefront of it and nixed that in the butt real quick, not just by PR tactics, but they actually punished a lot of the people who were involved in the discrimination in their country. In America, that doesn't happen, right? That doesn't necessarily happen at that level, right?
Yeah. Now, even in, like you said, even in even Europe too, like, racism is essentially illegal there. And it's like, are you going to see, I mean, you may not be able to get it because of our constitution, but you're starting to see, people losing their jobs and all of that for some of the comments they're making. So you're starting to see some of that shift to, okay, you can say stuff like this, but there will be ramifications.
Oh yeah, if you deny the Holocaust in Germany, I think that's like a crime or something like that, man. In America, you can deny slavery and just call it indentured servitude, and no one would bat an eye at you. At least pre-COVID, that was the case. Right now, you would have to be an idiot to go out there and say, slavery didn't happen or something like that. Not with all these statues being toppled. I didn't even know there were so many statues to begin with in this country that represented treasonous, terrorist white males, Bazungas. So.
No, the only reason I knew is I watched like a short, like I think it was Vice did a mini documentary, and they were just talking about a lot of these statues came from the Daughters of the Confederacy, and they, basically wanted to rewrite the Civil War lost cause, and literally that's where you got all these statues from. That's where you got all these people talking about states' rights from, all of that. So they were very effective, at least in and keeping that message preserved, at least for some period of time. Now, obviously, like I said, you're starting to see a wave of change. Trump's pushing back on the military bases, but you even got generals coming out saying, hey, some of these bases, they're going to have to change the name to those too. So.
Yeah, because it's an easy fix for them, right? Just changing the name of the base, that's easy. Right? You're not talking about changing uniforms or replacing turrets on tanks and stuff like that. You're talking about something that's really basic. And the fact that, the Tangerine Tyrant wants to dig his heels into the ground and say, no, we're not going to do anything. Well, that's, or at least from his perspective, that's going to cost you in November. You say stuff like that publicly, that's going to cost you in November. It's going to be a tidal wave against the party, and unfortunately, I don't think it's going to play out well for them. But let me go on to the next article from Washington Post. From wake word to woke word, Siri and Alexa tell you Black Lives Matter, but tech still has a diversity problem. Tech companies are expressing support for the protest movement, but many still lack diversity. Yeah, this is true. We read about this earlier. I'm not going to go too far into this, but it's like we had said before, Black people make up, less than 5% of tech companies, of the major tech companies, okay? 5%, in some areas like DC, I think the demographic in DC is something like 75% Black or something like that. If not greater. Places like Boston and New York, man, 30 to 35% Black, 40% Black. St. Louis, 65% Black, and yet they make up, maybe 1% of leadership roles there. This really abysmal sort of, you know,
Outcomes, essentially. Because
yeah,
I was gonna say the other thing I kind of talked about last time, but if you're really gonna be serious about this, you have to make sure that the young people, the early career people coming in, you have to make sure you identify those people early and make sure that they get those experiences so you have a qualified pool to pull from. Because I'm sure in some instances you just have people who, if you didn't have a formal program, this person knew this person and, he got this special assignment and led to this. And then, then they can pull the card of, oh, well, there was no one qualified. Well, you haven't taken the steps to make sure there's a meaningful, diverse, qualified group.
right. Right. That's one of the reasons, and that's a good point that you bring up, because that's one of the reasons why you even started the space and technology live stream on Mondays, was because I was at the Museum of Science and happened to go to one of the NASA exhibits there they were having, and very interesting exhibit on the Hubble and the James Webb satellite, and I watched the credits for the production on it, and there was so many Black people who worked on this on the James Webb satellite. I said, we're at NASA. And I said, I didn't even know Black people worked at NASA in that capacity. I always thought that NASA was a majority white sort of organization. But when I looked at the credits and I saw all these young Black people, millennials and early Gen X or late Gen Xers who had contributed to this, I said, man, we got to start talking about this, man. Black people's role in space exploration and stuff like that is being underrepresented. It doesn't get talked about a lot.
Yep. Not advertised. Exactly.
Yeah. All right, let me go to the next item on the docket from the Wall Street Journal. Black technologists hope new conversations about race spark overdue change. Despite year-long efforts by companies to diversify their tech workforces, Black people account for less than 8% of core IT workers in the US. Yeah, this is still a problem, obviously. I mean, we've read enough of this. I don't want to read too much into it, but less than 8% is the number, right? So that now we know. Now we know. Oh, let me
Mike, you reading? Go ahead.
Let me get to this point that Third Ward Colombian made about 20 minutes ago. I'm sorry about that. We missed that. He says, say, bro, did you hear the NBA is requiring its players to wear a micro ring in order for them to continue playing this season and next season going forward? Supposed to alert the NBA if the players have COVID-19 or COVID-19 like symptoms. It's kind of like a RFID chip, but only a ring. Yeah, we talked about this last year.
We talked. Yep.
Apple was working on a mood ring.
A mood ring. Yep.
They were working on a mood ring sort of design as one of their next big products. That the ring would vibrate if you got a message or something like that. You'd be able to speak to Siri through it and read your temperature and count how many steps you've taken and so on and so forth. So they have that technology for probably a couple of years now. And so in regards to the NBA, it's the only real way to determine if a player is overheating during a game, right? If their temperature is skyrocketing during a game. I think most players will probably hit, 99 degrees, 98 degrees Fahrenheit, or Celsius, sorry. Was it Fahrenheit?
Yeah, Fahrenheit.
Yes, Fahrenheit. When they're playing because of the high intensity.
Well, Mike, I'm sorry. Go ahead, dude. I wanted to follow up with a point on this.
Yeah, the other half is that they could use drones in the stadium to actually, with computer vision, to actually look at all the players on the floor. It's only 12 players, so it wouldn't be that hard for them to look at every single player individually while the drones whirls around the court and monitor every single player's status, health status, and their capabilities from a scoring perspective.
Okay, I guess here's how I'm seeing this. Because there's two angles to look at it, man. And I don't want you guys to think I have a tinfoil hat on here, right? But I need you guys to hear me out. So the one part is the ring, right? That's a real thing, and they want the players to wear it They say it has a 90% diagnostic accuracy, right? And I forgot what some of the other features they said that the ring has the ability to do. Now, let's table that for just a second. And then we turn to the NBA. So what the NBA is trying to institute right now, and what you guys really aren't hearing about, and this is like what I wanted to sort of bring up, because I follow a lot of like sports and shit, a lot of dudes that are like reporters, commentators, and all that. So what you're not hearing right now is that there's like a fucking NBA player rebellion right now. Okay, there's a player rebellion right now, because they're largely looking at this whole thing as like they're about to be like basically like test lab rats. The whole plan for the NBA is to basically stick them in a bubble at Disney World.
Yep, okay? Orlando.
In Orlando. Now, they were stipulating that basically no one can leave. Okay? Once the players are there, guess what? You're all going to be in this fucking Disney World bubble. No one can leave. I need y'all to really kind of like just, like I said, let's just take an objective viewpoint at this just for a second. So they're stipulating the players got to wear this ring, right? We've had players testing positive for COVID already. The NBA says, okay, well, what we could do is we could do it in a controlled environment and make them all wear these rings, and then that way we can determine. That sounds like real-time testing for the company and the maker that makes these rings. That's what that sounds like to me. It sounds like we cut a deal with the NBA and say, okay, well, look, why don't we do a controlled testing environment where we take all the players and we keep them in a confined space, make them all wear this ring, and we have them do these activities where they're expanding, you know, like what Dr. Fingers was talking about, like particulates, right? Micro particulates, sweat, and all that kind of shit. And we can determine how effective the rings are, right? We'll gauge the data on the ring, and then we'll go ahead and do traditional testing, and then we'll compare and contrast the data and all that shit. Meanwhile, college football, NFL, golf, you know, I don't know if they're going to do baseball. Guess what? They're all going to be happening outdoors, around a bunch of people. No one's wearing rings, no nothing. So the optics on this whole NBA thing, I don't know. No,
I mean, I could definitely see them doing that now. That you've had NBA players pushing back on the idea of playing in general. Some of them being like, "Hey, they don't want to distract from the moment," and you know, some of them it's just political. With, you know, someone like Kyrie Irving. But no, I mean, I could definitely see that. Granted, I know football starts a little bit later, so they're hoping that, you know, maybe they're closer to a vaccine by then. But all signs, I'm sure, point to college football and NFL.
Dude, college football starts in August, bro. Yeah.
Can I add some imagination to this thing you laid out, Complex? Because what makes anyone think it's going to be restricted to the athletes? If millionaire athletes with the biggest platforms you can buy can't get around this, what's some blue collar guy in Des Moines, Iowa, going to say when his job says you have to wear this ring in order to be?
Yeah. David, have you seen some of the back to work requirements?
Dude,
the masks and everything already get on my goddamn nerves. So anything worse, I'm not gonna like.
Well, Mike, I went back to the site. Remember, because I texted you, dude. I was showing you like what happened to my computer.
Yeah.
Okay, so I ended up having to swap it out, dude. Basically, like the drive ended up getting corrupted. So I had to swap it out. I go to the site. This was Wednesday afternoon. Bro, it's like, it was eerie as fuck in there. It was just like, there was a few people in there working, mask, gloves. There's a huge metal detector. I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like, yo, I don't know if I'm coming back to this, man. I'm gonna put in to just stay at home, dude.
No, my company's the same way. They sent out a memo talking about like rephasing in, and basically, hey, if you're people that need to be in the office, you can start going in Monday, but it's like only two people in the elevator, and you got to wear a mask everywhere, and we got a temperature station downstairs. You got to check your temperature when you come in.
Dude, that's crazy.
Yeah. Now, luckily, you know, if you're not if you can perform your job from home like me, they're like, you know, it could be as late as January 2021 before you come back in. So,
but even then, because they're still going to keep instituting that shit.
Yeah, I'm trying
to research this right now, but I think OSHA had a policy before all this COVID shit. OSHA's policy on face masks were completely contradictory to what they're saying now. Like you
Well,
weren't,
okay,
it was
but for
against OSHA policy to walk around in a face mask for like 8 hours a day or something. Like only certain jobs were required to have a respirator on your face.
but OSHA requires that. OSHA requires that based on the nature of the job. Okay,
right,
so
the nature
depending,
of the job, not
right,
any
but it
job
also,
ever.
it's also determined by what type of ISO spec equipment that you have. That's going to determine what type of particulates may come out of those types of equipments. Then that's going to determine what type of mask or ventilation the site needs and the workers need to wear. I used to recruit in steel. Okay, so trust me, I had to be OSHA sharp, let's just say. Okay, this doesn't have to do with OSHA though. This doesn't have to do with OSHA. This has to do. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I don't want to get too far off course, man. I really want to stick to this article. Protests around the country in the wake of the killing of George Floyd while in police custody are reigniting discussions of Black representation in the technology sector. Despite years-long efforts by companies to diversify their tech workforces, Black people accounted for 7.8% of people in core information technology occupations in the US, according to the CompTIA and IT Trade Group. Several Black tech executives said they hope the current attention on racial disparities will bring change. Let me expand this out. In turn, expand the participation of Blacks in technology in ways they haven't seen before. The awakening is happening because people are willing to have those conversations and go a few layers deeper, said Claude Johnson, a former executive who has held management and executive positions with companies including International Business Machines, IBM, American Express, and MDA Properties. Increasing corporate diversity helps, but that isn't the complete answer, he said. Below the surface is a 400-year-old problem, a disease white people have. It's not a Black problem. Address it with more diversity, yes. But why is it there in the first place, said Mr. Johnson, who is now the founder and executive director of the Black Fives Foundation, which preserves the history of pre-NBA era African-American basketball. Interesting. He likened what is happening now to the arrival of a new technology that some people don't like. We see it in tech. There is always resistance to in tech to the next thing, but it is inevitable. It doesn't matter if you object, it is here. It is the same thing here. I agree with this. This is kind of like 5G. Tony West, Senior Vice President and Chief Legal Officer at Uber Technologies Incorporated, said the tech industry has to get this right. That is because technology plays such a powerful role in society and has the potential to address issues, including police accountability. I think it also forced many of us to look into the mirror and ask, what am I doing to advance racial equality? Is what I'm doing to support Black lives enough, said Mr. West, who is also Black. Mr. West said one way companies can do so is to revamp hiring, promotion, and even vendor procurement practices, anti-diversity and inclusion outcomes to executive compensation. This way, we're not only sure that we are improving our D&I goals, we're also pushing others to reflect the values that we find important. Sherry Smith, editor-in-chief of Laptop Mag, says her career covering the technology sector was buoyed by mentorships from other African-American journalists. The jobs I got were because people reached out to me, she said. And I want to pay it forward for people who look like me. It goes beyond hiring for diversity to increasing the ranks of African Americans at all levels of tech, including the C-suite and the boardroom, and in venture capital, said Will Griffin, Chief Ethics Officer of artificial intelligence company Hypergiant Industries. Also, he said Blacks need to be given equity stakes in tech companies they join, which can lead to wealth creation to help them start their own companies. Too often on the African-American side, the company is sold, we didn't have equity, so then we got another job. We go get another job.
Damn, Mike, I mean, how long have we been talking about that whole equity piece, bro?
For years now. Mr. Griffin said his family has roots in the 3rd Ward of Houston, Shout out to Third Ward, Columbia, which is where George Floyd was from. It hit home when he was killed, and then when you see the videos of him talking, you hear it like that sounds like a homeboy. Many companies are now sponsoring inclusivity-oriented sessions or policies, said Daryl Plummer, Vice President and Chief of Research at Gartner Incorporated. He also was the chairman of the company's Black Analyst Caucus. I don't know what that is. However, when that happens, he said, everyone realizes how few Black faces are among the people deciding which policies or sessions to create. Adam Stanley, Global Chief Information Officer of real estate services company Cushman and Wakefield, said companies often say they are unable to find qualified Black candidates. If your profits aren't high, you work your tail off to find more. For some reason, in the diversity space, we for years talk about it, but never really moved the needle much. This is true. Okay.
Well, hold on a second. Can we stop right there? Which one is more true, that they don't do enough diversity hiring, or that it's actually hard to find competent Black people?
It may be a little bit of both. In my experience, what I've seen, I mean, I've heard that excuse made in somewhere like Atlanta. So there may be in some areas a complete lack, but I've definitely seen that used as an excuse to not go and find people get hired.
No, you know what it is? Not to discredit anybody else's statements, but the problem is that they don't want to cultivate talent, okay? They don't want to cultivate it. Because when white males come into these organizations, okay, a lot of them, and if I'm speaking from an IT perspective, a lot of them get trained to be in a role that they're in, okay? Even some of these entry-level guys get trained on the outside by somebody on the inside. Okay, somebody on the inside is feeding them information on how to do the job, so that, and then they create the role, and then they interview that guy, and he gets the job based on the knowledge of the role, and the HR person doesn't even know it. Okay, and then what happens here is he gets put under the wing of that same white individual who coached him from the inside, or knows him from the outside, and then that's how they kind of create their own sort of nepotism within the organization. Whereas a Black male, he doesn't have access to those social networks because he's network poor.
Exactly. The majority of jobs are actually filled by aren't even posted, is my understanding. So a lot of people got people who, my parents worked here and they know someone, so thus I can bring my son in when I'm getting ready to retire.
What they do is they'll create a requisition. They'll create a requisition. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I didn't hear anybody.
No, I just wanted to say one thing though. You quoted a woman in the article, Mike, and the woman said, I quote, "I didn't look for this job; they looked for me." And that's kind of how these things actually do work. We can make all the social movements in the world, but if the people that actually do matriculate up on their own merit, if it's those people who have to actually hold the door open for someone behind them. That's the only way all these things get done. You just described it yourself, and you called it nepotism, which is a loose description of the whole concept. But yeah, that's how people are. We help our own. So the idea that, white people are keeping Black people out of a certain group, and thus white people now need to open the space for Black people, I think it's a losing move, when we just need to actually depend on our own people who actually make it in, and then we open the hole wider for more people.
Most of these people most of these organizations don't even have the representation for that. So you may have a Black person that works in marketing, but they don't necessarily work in IT, right? So that's what the article is talking about, right? They don't necessarily have representation in their ranks
in that sector,
open up that opportunity to begin with. So you can't even have that conversation until you really start diversifying, and they're purposely skipping around. We talked about this a couple of years ago. I remember when Preem was on the panel, okay, back when Preem used to be a part of Brain Trust.
Yeah.
There was a social experiment on LinkedIn where they had a resume and a profile of a candidate, okay? It was a fictitious sort of profile. They put a white face on there and they put a Black face on the other one. They didn't really change much about the profile. The white profile got 10 times as many hits than the Black profile. Okay.
I mean, there's nothing surprising about that if you really just accept the truth of the world. I mean, the
No,
country.
you can't.
No, you don't.
You know,
Hold on. Let me explain my case.
okay.
This country is still 70% white. Do you think a white man in
Uh-oh.
Nigeria or in or a majority African country is going to get the same brotherly love on a random application as his fellow Nigerian?
If the person,
Like,
if the
let's just accept the fact that white people are going to look out for white people. Black people should look out for black people.
Yeah,
the
but
David, the
the thing.
problem with that though is when you start looking at how much money black people give these companies and they're not in representation, that
Well,
becomes
not
very
Still a black
problematic.
well, not only
it's still
that,
a black
not
people problem.
well, not only that, but Mike is going to actually tell you about that experiment. Go ahead, Mike.
No, I was explaining to you that the experiment, it was just that. It was a social experiment. They didn't know this person. It was a fictitious profile.
That's
But
the
when you
problem.
talk about diversity and inclusion, they're purposely skipping around reaching out to predominantly black candidates.
You can't say that. You can't say that, and then when it's actually tested, you fail fucking miserably.
Yeah, I remember. I think it was MSNBC or one of these networks had did a similar experiment, like when Obama came to office, something like that. And they kind of dinged AR on it, HR on it, and asked the question, well, why did you contact this candidate? They said we don't have to give any justification. A real aggressive response that basically, go screw. We don't have to talk to you about this. It was an actual fictitious profile. This is the mentality of what goes on in most of these organizations. But now in 2020, everybody's running around saying we're diversity and inclusion. But the same companies that want to say they support BLM, they themselves don't have that level of diversity and inclusion in their own organizations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they're spending money to promote this sort of concept that they themselves have never fulfilled.
Well, it's to keep you on as a consumer, man.
Yeah, it makes the company, right? It makes the company look good, right? Now all these companies
They're woke. They're woke.
right? They're riding the wave, right, of the trend. But in reality, like Amazon and Microsoft and Google and all these big Fortune 100 tech companies, they themselves don't have that diversity.
Wait, Mike, wasn't Amazon? Wasn't Amazon? Didn't they just can a brother in New York who led a worker walkout in a warehouse like in upstate New York, or I think maybe it was in Queens, New York, or yeah, and they fired him under the auspices of, oh well, he violated social distancing orders, so we had to let him go. But see, never mind, he was addressing the work conditions of a place where I think it was 70% of the people working in there were black. So I just find it all pretty fucking ironic, bro.
No. What are we exposing here? You kind of laid it out, and I don't even think you've actually dug deep enough into this.
No, what we're exposing is
what Mike just said. No, what Mike just said about not you specifically, Complex, but something Mike said actually about how these companies themselves will preach diversity and yet don't actually believe in it in their own policies. What does that tell us about these companies and their concept of diversity? It's always been bullshit.
No.
That for their own market gain.
No, I understand that. We understand that. So I want to make sure that we separate.
So we're playing their bullshit game with them.
No, I want to make sure that we separate the company from the employees, because this is an employee issue. It's not so much of a company issue. The company will always exist regardless of who's running it. But the problem is the people that are running it still are bringing in old world, Cold War sort of mentality into the workplace. It's not necessary. The article that we read, I think earlier this week, that said that, or actually yesterday, companies that diversify have better results than companies that do not.
So it's bad for business, and it's bad for the well-being of America.
Yeah.
Competitively.
Yeah, it's not so much about, black people who work there need to open up opportunities. That's secondary to the main issue. The main issue is that somebody set an agenda and others who are supposed to enforce it are not willing to enforce it. Okay, there's an unwillingness to do it.
Or there's a very sort of lax pedestrian definition of what diversity means, right? Because that in and of itself could be subjective. So, a company could say, oh yes, we have a diversity council and all this type of shit. And like, I'm not gonna say that. I'm gonna keep it PG. But that in and of itself is subjective. Like I said, just case in point, Amazon. Like you tell me Black Lives Matter, and next thing you, but the Black lives that are employed by you in a fucking warehouse where they're complaining about work conditions don't fucking matter. Like, what part of Black lives matters to you? The fucking consumer dollar part?
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, we read an article last weekend that said about Boston, about these major VCs and the lack of diversity there. Boston is a majority minority city, man.
I know what you were saying. It's like it's majority minority, but the shit is what? Italian and Irish?
No, it's majority minorities. It's mostly Black and Latino, and Asian and other makes up the rest of the demographic.
Okay.
Right? So Black people make up like 28% of the population, and Latinos make up like 30% or something like that. So the problem is that 70% of the IT is actually led by white males. Why is this even the case, right?
How does that even add up, bro?
Right. It's one of those things where they're trying to maintain a position, and I'm speaking only in relevance to the tech industry. They're trying to maintain this sort of dominance in this area while at the same time promoting the idea of diversity. And there's a disconnect from the C-level down and from the C-level up. There's a disconnect. Somebody's not talking to each other. Most CEOs are not sitting in the office at all. They're usually remote, or they usually out somewhere else. So they have no idea what's going on in their organization. They should get metrics and reports from their executives, executive assistants and stuff like that. But
they're leaving that shit even to them. You know what I mean? They're even that's not even making it to them, because they're actually deferring that portion of the decision making to the people below them, right? So they're kind of insulated by it, and it's convenient, right? Because then what happens is when there's a PR disaster, guess what? The CEO can come out and act like as if he's none the fucking wiser, and in a lot of extents, he is.
I was going to ask quickly too, Mike. Have you seen? I think I heard this. I don't know if you can maybe confirm this or not. That minorities tend to go for things like boot camps and certifications and things like that in tech, and there tends to be, at least right now, maybe it's shifting away, a bias against some of those things.
Yes, that's usually how you because you can't afford to go to Harvard, right? No one than that kind of money, right? And so what happens here is they take the shortcut. They take a shortcut because they have to, because it's the most cost efficient one. And so if you're a minority and you make under a household income of less than $30,000 a year, then you qualify for certain kind of grants to some of these institutions under $10,000. And so you take advantage of that, right? That's sort of programs that have been set up. Black people take advantage of it. But the problem is a lot of these tech companies are not recruiting from there. Now they are. Elon Musk has been very vocal about, we don't really need college degrees. Well, that opens up a lot of market share.
That opens up an awful lot, Mike. We covered that. We actually literally was digging through job listings on SpaceX and Tesla. And I mean, we were amazed at how many jobs aren't even requiring like a college degree.
Right. And so to Gabe's point in the chat, he says, I don't think Black people should hold these organizations to such a high moral standard. Companies are in business to make money. The only thing they owe us is to compensate us if we work for them. See, I understand what Gabe is.
Wait. You mean Gabe actually had a cognizant point and he's not trolling? Very interesting.
Well, it depends on your perspective too. That's a very American perspective of, hey, the purpose of a business is shareholder value. You go to somewhere like Europe, it's more about stakeholders and effects. So that's a very different business model and mindset.
Right. But in regards to America, in most of these urban cities, these companies get big tax breaks based on the idea of diversity and inclusion. Okay, it's a part of the social equity. So you can't say, well, we shouldn't hold them to such a high moral standard. It's not so much high moral standard, but it's about the policies that they're supposed to abide by. Okay, they signed up for this.
Mike, well, not only that, dude, but look, let me tell you something. When you accepted those tax breaks, those subsidy dollars, when you accepted all that shit, did you say, hey, let's just make sure that the money that we're going to be getting for all this, let's make sure none of that is black money, because, you know, we want to make sure that, you know, we're not accepting any of their money. Mm-hmm. And as a result, we don't have any sort of social obligations to them. Mm-hmm. Okay, like, is that happening? Fuck no. They just take the goddamn money. That subsidies, tax breaks, all that are basically bankrolled by you.
Yes, usually when they take these property leases and stuff like that, these big tax incentives for 5 to 10 years,
right?
They don't fulfill it, or if they do try to fulfill it, they fulfill it with, let's say, Indians who come from the subcontinent of India. Okay? They wait for somebody to come from Mumbai, and then they say, oh, look, we have diversity, right? They try to fill the quota that way. Somebody is purposefully going out of their way to not seek out African Americans exclusively when they're supposed to do that for some of these companies that signed on to these sort of tax incentives. Okay.
Yeah, but all of a sudden now it's pretty damn convenient.
Mm-hmm. I was going to add too, Mike. It's not just urban areas. Deep South, they've been doing that for decades, giving away big tax abatements to these manufacturing companies to come, like 10 years, no taxes, we'll develop the land for you, all of that. Like that happened with like Hyundai. I'm sure it happened with like, I believe it's Airbus and Mobile. Like all these manufacturing companies that have moved to these southern states, you know, I believe Volvo and in Tennessee, like, they get those types of incentives as well too. So it's not just urban areas.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's you know, that's what's going on. And you know, I understand what people I understand people are saying, you know, we shouldn't hold them to such a high moral standard, but they signed up for this. They signed up for this. Nobody told them that they had to. They went out and did it themselves. It was great for marketing, but now that the pressure is on, they're like, oh, wait a second. We only have about, you know, 9% African American.
Yep. Dr. Phoenix said BMW in the chat too. That's another company.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, well, wait a second here. You signed up for this, and now you're saying you only have less than 10% of your workforce in places that have 25, 30, 35, 40, 55, 65% black areas.
The fucking numbers don't add up, man. They just simply don't add up.
Yeah. It's criminal what they're doing. It's criminal. It's very criminal, and they're getting away with it. And now people, you know, like the girl who put up the hashtag last week, pull up a shut up. You know, don't just put out those BLM emails and you know, stickers on your website, bumper stickers and whatnot. You gotta be held to what you signed up for. You signed
up social awareness email.
Yeah, give back that money. My thing is, if you didn't fulfill the quota,
give it back.
Yeah, give back the money then. If you're not going to give back the money, we're going to put sanctions on your company. We effectively, today's Saturday, on Monday, you cannot open up your doors. We will put chains around your doors and board it all up until you pay up.
I'm sorry, man. I would, you know, and I don't know, maybe if anyone's listening, this may even be sort of like an angle that you take. And, you know, squeezing your goddamn politicians. You say, hey, look, man, you know, you want to institute a certain, I'm not going to say a hiring quota, but you need to just know and understand that like diversity, you know, standards need to be met. Mm-hmm. And we need to ensure that, you know, a number of people are being hired from certain key areas to ensure economic stimulation in certain key areas, right? Because if you have people employed, guess what they're also doing? Spending money. Okay. So, you know, it's sort of like, look, you know, politicians have to cut responsible deals with companies that are going to set up shop and say, hey, you know, look, if you don't do this and you don't adhere to this, like year 3 and 4, your tax rate goes up, you know, your property, you know, or whatever incentives that we give you, if you're not meeting these clips right here, then yo, we're going to remove those. Yeah. So yeah, you got to like give companies penalties for not like, sticking to a standard.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I was going to say, I was just going to reiterate too, like we were talking about earlier, Mike, it's a performance issue. It drives business performance. So if people in the chat still don't even agree with all the points we've given, like I said, performance of business, better profits, higher return to shareholders. That's another reason.
Yeah.
And that's it. Go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
Well, Gabe A says again, he says, if it's the policies, take that up with the nation's legal institutions. It's not so much about the nation's legal institutions. It's not so much about that. It's the company who's making the money off of it and getting away with it. You got to expose them for who they are. It's not about, well, a business is only there to make money, and if Indians fit that criteria, then they're the lowest way. No. A lot of these stipulation says African American, okay, social justice, social impact, social equity. Those terms are what they signed up for.
Right, and then if it says minority, then that doesn't mean everything except Black men.
Yeah. Let me have Miss Vivian Ibrahim on the panel.
Oh, hey Vivian, what's up? Welcome.
Hello, everyone. How are you?
Good.
Good. You guys have now tapped into the reason why I spoke out. I went to the Department of Homeland Security because President Trump was eager to find out exactly why the H-1B issue and all that good stuff, IT, but they never expected a Black woman IT executive to show up, and I did. And the reason why I came out is because of the federal tax dollars that all of the institutions that all of you have been naming have federal contracts with the federal government, Amazon, Google, all of them, Microsoft, you name it, knock yourself out. The reason why I came out is because that's our tax dollars too. Black men, Black women, hello. I got upset. And not only that, but how dare you take our federal tax dollars and give it to all of these people who are hiring H-1B, number one, and number two, a national security issue. Okay, I have a problem with that. And that's the reason why I came out. Google, all of them, when they talk about, well, we want to use Google, we want to use Office 365 for the federal government, and we're giving them contracts to do it. And then they go and hire second and third vendor contractors and then call them minority businesses. I even ran up on someone who had an 8A contract. I'm like, are you serious? None of your company is Black, not one person. How dare you? And that's the reason why I came out. And now if I can use the term very lightly, the white Americans are now becoming upset at their federal tax dollars because they're figuring out that, okay, if it's the Black tax dollar, it's the white tax dollar because it's all federal. So you guys are now on the right track of why I came out to the Trump administration. I would never have done that. I would have went on and made my little six figures and went on back into the life of whatever. But because of that, all of you on this phone call pay federal tax dollars. And those federal tax dollars are supposed to be for we the people, the American, and that includes Black America. And I expressed that explicitly with the Trump administration, and they're trying to get me to do some things with them to basically assist Black Americans with IT, with the C levels. How dare you, Google, have a $450 million contract and there are no C-level Blacks? I have a problem with that. How dare you? How dare all of you? How dare you, Mark Zuckerberg? How dare all of you sit here and sacrimoniously speak to us about IT and how you have all these contracts and you are till today receiving federal contract money and not hiring Blacks? I have a problem with that. And that's why I came out. And I'm telling you guys, now you're on to something. Welcome to my world.
All right.
I would say that we've not to say that we've always been on it. We've always just understood though that was a part in all of this, especially when it comes down to government regulation and all that kind of stuff, right? You have to, that's where you have to start to focus on the nuts and bolts. And again, when these companies are publicly traded, they move into certain municipalities, they're granted tax breaks, They're granted all these different things that is undergirded by the taxpayer at the end of the day.
Yes, it is.
And if that tax base just so happens to have a demographic of Black folks, then that means that you vis-a-vis have some fucking skin in the game. Pardon my
That
language.
is correct.
Yeah.
Whether you're in the poor part or the rich part, you have skin in the game. You are absolutely correct. And I want to tell you guys one more thing, that Lordstown plant in Ohio, GM built that plant on a $60 million federal grant given because of where they were building it at. And then they pulled out and started making the cars in Mexico. Well, the state of Ohio is now suing because they want their money back, or the federal government, I can't remember which one, but they're suing General Motors to get the $60 million back because they did not keep up with the contract that they were supposed to do, or whatever they were supposed to be doing.
Hey, Mike, real quick, somebody's asking, can you explain real quick what sea level means?
Yeah, and Ben, let me jump to this next item on the docket from Engadget. Google's racial equity push includes $175 million for Black businesses. It aims with 30% of leaders to come from underrepresented groups. So Google's commitment to supporting the Black community will extend well beyond YouTube's $100 million fund. Google and Alphabet chief Sundar Pichai has unveiled a racial equity initiative that, among other things, will contribute a total of $175 million toward creating economic opportunities for Black businesses and workers. Most, $100 million, will go toward funding participation for Black-led capital firms, startups, and entrepreneur organizations. Another $50 million will go to financing and grants for small businesses, thanks to help from Opportunity Finance Network. We talked about Opportunity Finance, I think earlier in the week. The company will also devote $15 million to worker training through allies like National Urban League, and at least $10 million to improve access to education, equipment, and economic opportunities for developers. The internet giant is also promising $3 million to address gaps in computer science and STEM education. It is widening an awards program to 16 more universities to tackle gaps in computer science research and bolstering representation in AI with $250,000 toward Black and AI. Representation within Google will matter as well. It's aiming to increase Black representation at senior levels by opening senior positions to outside candidates and investing in cities like Atlanta, Chicago, and London. It's aiming for underrepresented groups to make up 30% of leadership by 2025. Google is setting up a talent liaison to mentor and advocate staff from underrepresented groups, regardless of level, and will launch a task force to generate concrete solutions for accountability in areas like hiring, performance management, and retention. That group should have its first proposals in 90 days, which I said. There will also be anti-racism and health programs, as well as broader attempts to boost inclusion and belonging. The efforts could go some distance toward improving Black access to Google in the tech industry, and appears to do more than provide lip service to racial equity. With that said, Google has struggled to improve its diversity in the past. Money and programs can help, but there are no guarantee that Google's cultural demographics will change. And see, that's been my point from the beginning, that people are bringing in, this Cold War ideological thinking into the workplace, and that's what's creating the lack of diversity in terms of African Americans being a part of it. But I think this is one of the best strategies I've seen thus far. Okay, this is the best strategy I've seen thus far, and the best way to use $175 million, which tells the federal government this actually does not cost a lot. Okay, like Vivian explained earlier, GM got a $60 million grant for a factory, and then they up and left after a few years. Okay, that money is wasted. This is a better use of $175 million. And so when we have these conversations, we have to keep in mind that this, how much it's going to cost is always a question. Well, how much is this really going to cost us? Well, $175 million is the best way I've seen thus far that they've used.
Hey, Mike, I was going to ask, with tech executives, how do they tend to do they tend to come up in the company, or do you see them go get MBAs, or how does that work? Because I'm not sure if you're familiar with Management Leadership Tomorrow.
I heard of it.
Yeah, they're big. So their whole thing is pushing for basically a program for people who are looking to get into like top 25 MBA programs. Specifically, they mainly focus on Black people, but as well as they'll bring in other minorities as well too. But they'll sort of help them go through the process of preparing for the GMAT and then sitting for it, essay review, basically a year-long sort of prep to get you in. And then on some of the business school applications, they'll even ask, did you participate in management leadership prep for tomorrow, which is sort of guide you through, and then, networking as well as people on the other side. So I was just curious, on the tech side, do people go the MBA route or sort of come up through the ranks?
Mm-hmm.
At least from what you've seen.
It's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag. I know some, some companies are really big on former military engagement. And so they assume that because you had high rank and leadership in the military, that you'll be just as good here. And sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. And so some of these programs that you're mentioning, the program that you're mentioning, I haven't heard too much of that being leveraged in my experience in the tech industry. But what I have seen is that for Black people to move up in some of these leadership roles, they got to do the dance, like what the other article said earlier. You got to emulate that of a Mazunga. And the other half is that you have to be pretty cutthroat. You have to be pretty cutthroat. That means you have to eliminate other Blacks from coming up as well.
Yeah, because I was gonna say, I know even in tech, sometimes there's even a bias against MBAs as far as like tech startups and things like that. They may not even want them. So sometimes, programs like that may be ineffective. And like I said, some companies, they rely on, hey, we'll go hire a talented MBA and sort of train them up into, a senior level role. And some will sort of be biased towards, we'll just work in house with the talent we've got, or like you said, veterans or things like that. So yeah.
I think the other strategy is people who have a background in MIS. So if you, instead of getting an MBA, to get the MIS, Management Information Systems.
Yep.
So that usually plays a role as well. Somebody else was going to say something?
Mike, I'd like to say something. To answer the young lady's question about C-levels, when we speak of C-levels, we're speaking of the CEO, CFO, CIO, CTO, technology officers, all of the officers that run the core of the company. And with IT, the higher up you go, the more exposure you have to all of them. Now, as far as some of the C-levels that I've seen, a lot of them have come through the ranks of nepotism, of course. And, it's not what you know, it's who. And they get up there and they have no idea what they're doing. Then you have a lot of them who, like you all said, they go through the MIS or MBA programs. And then you have a lot of them are coming up through the developer ranks via nepotism. And I used to be a developer, and now I'm sitting here as vice president of something, and they end up clueless about what the structure of the company and the needs of the company as far as IT. One of the things that have been happening over the past 20 years, IT drives the company itself. The only thing that is the core of the company is what it has, what it is selling. Other than that, from the secretary all the way up, IT drives it. HR, everything. Another thing, HR, because there are not enough African Americans in HR, that we've been excluded. That is one of the reasons why we are having a hard time even finding the jobs, because we are being systemically excluded via HR.
Yep. Let me go to this next one. This is from Fill Me One. Black Voices in Tech. We want change, not just charity. Oh, man. But for many Black people in the tech community, the statements don't carry a lot of weight. David Dallin Thomas, a content strategy advocate for Think Company, and who's also working on a book called Design for Cognitive Bias, said that these statements remind him a lot of the platitudes companies gave about the coronavirus. They were all of these companies saying that we're all in this together, and that they care about us. About 99.9% of it, I could care less what they say, he said. Everyone felt like they had to say something. It wasn't so much about furthering a particular goal or agenda, it's just so they wouldn't be left out. Yvonne Hutchinson, the CEO and co-founder of Ready, said a diversity solutions firm that works primarily with the tech industry acknowledges that it's good that the companies are even willing to release such statements. A couple of years ago, most companies weren't even willing to say the phrase Black Lives Matter, she said. I think it's a positive indication that the Overton window has moved to such a point where it feels obligatory for companies and brands to come out in support of the movement. Yvonne Hutchinson left, this is based on the picture. However, Hutchinson thinks that the words aren't nearly enough. These statements aren't necessarily backed by real action, she said, pointing out that the words ring hollow when the companies themselves do not have a good history of diversity and amplifying Black voices. For me, I don't even look at these statements anymore, said Hutchinson. I look at diversity reports. I look at the investment in your teams. I look at the executive team and your leadership team. To me, that's a real indication of your commitment to change. If you're not hiring, promoting, being led by, and investing in Black people, and if you're not firing the people who are racist, then you know a statement doesn't mean so much. Diversity and inclusion has been the sticking point with the tech industry for the better part of the last decade. Over the past 5 years, since tech companies have started releasing diversity reports, little has changed. According to recent reports, Blacks comprise of only 3% of employees in the top 75 Silicon Valley tech companies. In non-tech companies, on the other hand, they make up around 24% of the workforce. The situation is even worse with technical jobs. The number of Black technical employees at Google and Facebook has risen by less than a percentage since 2014. While the percentage of Black tech workers at Apple remained at 6% for the past 5 years. Sans complex design. Often, the lack of diversity in Black people in tech is attributed to an educational pipeline problem that they say simply aren't interested in these careers. The National Science Foundation, however, uncovered that 20% of computer science graduates are Black and Latino, which does not at all square with the fact that they only make up 6% of the tech industry. This is the true point that I was saying earlier. If you really want to make a difference, look at their workforce, said Leslie Miley, a former CTO of the Obama Foundation. Miley also previously worked as an engineer lead at Google, Slack, Apple, and Twitter. The percentages of African Americans in tech roles have not moved in spite of months and years of platitudes by executive staff.
Now, I didn't realize that number was that big of a disparity. So 20% of computer science grads are Black and Hispanic, and only, what you said, 3% of the tech? Six? Wow.
That's not the number that grabbed me. That's not the number. The thing that got me was she said over the past 5 years. She's absolutely right, because in 2014, the Reverend Jesse Jackson went to Silicon Valley and spoke to all of the heads of Google, Apple, all of them, and told them that they need to diversify, stop hiring these H-1B people and diversify. He said that in 2014, and that one shocked me because I didn't realize he was on to that one. That got me good.
Yeah, no,
Maxine Waters is the same thing.
Yeah, I know he went around, like, I think he worked with like Howard and some other HBCUs and actually setting up partnerships, like, so students could get internships with some of those companies.
Wow.
I mean, that's insane that, you know, you got to do all that just to get a goddamn internship, right?
Well,
but
well,
go ahead.
just reading this. Miley also called out companies like Google which have either severely reduced or eliminated diversity programs in recent years. This was written before the last article we read. These programs are defunded at the drop of any type of bad economic news, he said. If they were truly on the side of righteousness, truly on the side of justice, truly on the side of Black Lives Matter, then Black projects would benefit. Underrepresented people wouldn't be cut when there's an economic downturn, because that would not be optional. They would be required. I'd like to see some real commitment to these causes that go beyond what's happening in the news cycle. Tiffany Ashley Bell, the founder of Human Utility, a platform to help people in Baltimore, Detroit, and other cities pay their water bills, wrote a Medium post entitled, "It's Time to Call Out White Supremacy in Tech." In it, she asked serious questions to her peers. Are we willing to reckon with investors who think investing in Black entrepreneurs is an act of charity and thus offer embarrassing token amounts? Are we willing to stop sponsoring and attending technology conferences with mostly white male speaker lineups? What are we willing to do differently to dismantle white supremacy in the technology sector, and because of technology's pervasive influence, dismantle white supremacy in society? This is why I started going to the tech conferences on the continent. Okay, so that's exactly why I stopped supporting them.
Yep.
Have you been to Afrotech, Mike?
No, I haven't. I've been invited, but I have not.
Okay.
Bell also said that while many non-Black people in tech don't think of themselves as overt racist, there's often implicit bias at play. Have you looked at the tone and the content of your Black employees' performance reviews? Are you sure they were evaluated on their work performance and not their performance of cultural fit? Code switching is a mental tax on Black people in the workplace, and sometimes isn't refunded when reviews come around. And this constant stress negatively compounds over the long term. This is very true. This is very true.
Double consciousness, like Du Bois talked about.
Yep. Creates battle fatigue. Both Bell and Hutchinson believe it's also important to promote Black employees to leadership positions. It's really hard to have a voice if you're an entry-level person and you're worried about pissing off your manager. This is very true. If you look at the leadership team of some of these companies, there are no Black people there. If you want to hear powerful Black voices, then promote powerful Black voices. Have them on your executive and your leadership teams and empower them to speak out. This is a double-edged sword.
Mike, okay. I was just about to ask you about this shit. You know?
Yeah, this is a double-edged sword for Black women.
Speak on it, dude.
Yeah, this is a double-edged sword for Black women, because on one hand, they're characterized as being too attitudinal, this sort of hand on the hip, finger waving sort of Black woman. But then on the other hand, they're expected to actually adopt some of the culture, be a cultural fit, right? This is a conundrum.
It's a catch-22. What do you? Either way, right? Either way, you can't actually exercise any power to institute change. Okay, that's ultimately what this boils down to. It's like you're put into two diametrically opposed positions where you largely are going to either be villainized or you're completely just relegated to just being a non-factor in the discussion. Okay, either way it goes, you're in a polarizing position. You're either to the extreme left or to the extreme right. We're never in a position where you could come in, present an idea as it relates to the conversation, and the idea being the idea that wins out, gets instituted, without there being some sort of connotation about who is giving the idea and all that kind of shit. It's always this thing where it's what you are doing is ultimately more or less addressing a social issue and not really exercising your expertise in your field. that's why as soon as you said that, I was like, whoa, 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 here we go again. Here we go again. Here we go again. Like the whole idea here is that we have talented individuals, right, who can make a mark. That's really what this boils down to. They have the chops, they have the skills, they have the programming knowledge, they have the tech skills, they have it all. Okay. It's what we want is access to the same environment that everybody else has. That's it.
Yeah. It says, I'm just reading the last paragraph. It says, while that's good, Miley said that just isn't enough. I think giving money to causes is great, he said, but you have to invest in the community, which is what I've been saying. Instead, he said that what they are doing is simply charity, partly as a way to get good PR. I don't want charity, I want investment. Stop pandering to us with charity and start partnering with us in investment. Yes. Yes. I don't see anything wrong with what they're saying. This is something that we have been saying for a while now, that all the money that these companies get from these tax incentives, these tax abatements, that money could have been better invested into the community, but they chose not to do it. And therein lies the problem. They up and leave and go to Mexico or some other place, even just another city.
Just resource extraction.
Yeah. Many of the life sciences company here, they're guilty of this. Okay, they're supposed to have a social equity program to keep blacks, to hire more black people, more African Americans, and they haven't done any of that. Okay, and if they do, they hire them in positions that has no more upward mobility. And so that means, you're in a position that has no future at all. And so you either stay there for a few years and leave, or you stay there into perpetuity. But now we're pulling back the coat, the drape on a lot of these companies with these articles. I'm starting to see, and I'm liking a lot of stuff that they're saying. But
the other thing I was going to add too, Mike, I don't know if you've seen it. I've kind of seen it a little bit in clusters. My company, where you'll sort of have people who are black kind of lumped into one group. And I even had a cousin who was a lawyer, who she sort of said the same thing would happen, that they called it the Negro tax, where basically, they could put all the black lawyers in this group, or I've seen it where, all the black people in finance tend to be working for this manager, and then there are none in the other groups.
Yep.
So kind of going back to what you're saying about, you kind of getting pigeonholed and really going nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
All right, let me get to this next item on the docket from Breitbart.com. This one was sent in by Vivian. Harvard investor science establishment uses visas to exclude Black Americans from STEM. The science establishment fights to make sure that it doesn't have to take extraordinary measures to bring Blacks, women, and other minorities into science by using our immigration system, said Eric Weinstein, a Harvard-trained scientist who is also managing the director at Theo Capital. My middle finger is pointed straight at you. You're weak. You're cowardly. You don't deserve to be in charge of science, he said. The recent declarations by science managers of their support for Black Americans is an entire sham, he said, continuing. If those people care so deeply about Black lives mattering and getting Black people into STEM, here's what you do. You reinstitute mandatory retirement for people who have been on the job for 20 years and have shown very little productivity, and you cut off the supply of visas so that you can't pay for work by giving people in immigration, and you're forced to use the labor market. And then you stop talking about how beautiful it is that science is international, not because it is international, but because that is a cover story. Weinstein has long argued that top science managers help to flood the labor market for college graduates by creating the Martin H-1B program in 1990. In a 2017 report, Weinstein showed how top science managers allied in the late 1980s with business leaders to invent a claimed shortage of American scientists. This fake shortage stampeded legislators to expand the H-1B program in the 1990 Immigration Expansion Bill signed by President George H.W. Bush. Weinstein wrote, American industry and big science convinced official Washington to put in place a series of policies that had little to do with any demographic concerns. Their aims instead were to keep American scientific employers from having to pay the full U.S. market price of high-skilled labor. They hope to keep the U.S. research system staff and employees classified as trainees, students, and postdocs for the benefit of employers. The result would be to render the U.S. scientific workforce more docile and pliable to authority and senior researchers by attempting to ensure this labor market sector is always flooded largely by employer-friendly visa holders who lack full rights to respond to wage signals in the U.S. labor market. Since then, the floodgates have been opened wider, so pushing many Americans out of the careers in science and technology. Each year, the federal government allows companies, laboratories, and universities to import and hire 500,000 foreign workers, including 100,000 H-1Bs, roughly 400,000 new graduates of U.S. colleges, plus many thousands of J-1 scholars. Roughly half of the university's apprentice scientists dubbed postdocs are foreign-born. Nationwide, companies and universities employ a population of roughly 1.3 million U.S. visa workers, the vast majority of whom are Asian men. Despite many private lawsuits, the federal and state governments do not enforce anti-discrimination laws to the U.S. Executives, university managers, and foreign-born managers who hire blocks of Asian men instead of diverse American graduates and professionals. Breitbart News has shown how U.S. executives and science managers prefer visa workers because they work hard for little money. They comply with their managers' demands for weekend work, for transfers from city to city, and for years of transient gig worker contracts. And there is such a large quantity of them that they can smother frequent quality problems. The foreign workers comply because they know their managers control their lives. The managers can ruin their careers by deporting them back to India or China, and they can nominate them for a huge prize of green card and citizenship. With such a huge alternative supply of subordinate, cheap, skilled labor, U.S. managers avoid hiring the outspoken Americans and unconventional graduates who might leave the manager's top priority project for better offer elsewhere. Breitbart News has extensively covered the scale of the hitting visa worker economy, as well as its damaging impact on American graduate professionals, scientists, and national innovation. Federal data shows that few Black Americans get jobs in the tech industry or in the university laboratories, despite many declarations by CEOs and science managers of a need for more minorities and women. If you want to get women and minorities and everyone else into science, here's what you do, Weinstein said. You allow the labor market to work without using visas as labor relief. You start classifying the workers who are in the labs as workers and not calling them students or postdoctoral students. I care about my Black brothers and sisters one hell of a lot more than you do, Weinstein said to the science managers. I've been at this since the 1980s, and if you read my papers and read my work, you will see that it has been consistent. The soul of American science is the middle finger. So consider this National Science Foundation, Science Magazine, Nature Magazine as a challenge. My middle finger is pointed straight at you. You're weak, you're cowardly, you don't deserve to be in charge of science. You jumped the shark, you don't know what you're doing, and if you want to talk about how to get Blacks into science, I'm absolutely your guy. So, Vivian, you sent this one in. You want to elaborate on your thoughts on this?
Basically, this is one of the areas that I have been fighting for on behalf of Black America. The fact that all of us have gone to college, we're in the STEM fields, but we are being outsourced and insourced by the OPT, optional practical training, for India and China. And we have also, they jump over to the H-1B, which crosses over into the regular workplace, which is a problem on behalf of all of us who have already gotten our degrees and gone on. The interns that everyone is speaking of that should be relatively easy for Black Americans to get into have been flooded by these OPT. And they've been flooded for years and years and years, and they continue to do it. This guy, who is the CEO of Thiel Capital, I don't know if you all know anything about Peter Thiel, but Eric Weinstein is the CEO of Thiel Capital, which is big bucks in the venture capital world. But he went ahead and exposed what has been going on in the universities and on into the workplace. And we have been, I have been after the Trump administration to do something about these OPTs. In the regulation area, it is ICE, that portion of the Department of Homeland Security. When I saw who was running this program, I almost passed out because the lady, supposedly, the matter of fact, I looked up the CIO yesterday of ICE and still almost passed out. She's a lawyer from somewhere who has no experience in IT whatsoever. Then you have the lady that's running the SEVP program that actually gives the universities the right to hire all of these OPTs and then send them out into the world. And it's been a problem for Black America for many, many years. And now it has become a white America problem because they've crossed over into the workforce as OPTs. Let me just rephrase that portion. And it is a problem. It is a problem in the STEM community because they have flooded the market, not only with H-1B, but with the OPT for the students. They postdoctorate, you name it. They've been coming on board. So the market has been flooded and nobody has known why all of these Black Americans and white Americans have not been getting jobs. This guy broke down exactly what has been happening since the 1980s. And he went ahead and told their little secret that they have been conspiring all these years. Well, the Trump administration is aware of that, and they are trying their hardest to get rid of the OPT program because it does not have a cap like H-1B. H-1B, you hear about the 65,000 H-1B per year. They never want to tell you it's been going on since the 1990s, so multiply that by however many years. But the OPT has no cap. So there are millions of regular university students and graduate students that have flooded the market, and that these big tech companies and small, we are finding out, have been hiring, and there are millions of them here. And that's the reason why I sent that story, because I wanted to make sure that everybody understood exactly what, unfortunately, Trump walked into. He didn't set the program up. It wasn't him, but he understood that there was a problem because he said, hey, I used the problem at my Mar-a-Lago and other resorts with the H-1Bs and the H-2Bs. But he had no earthly idea about OPT. And that's what I wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of on this call, that, hey, we have a big problem because all of the students right now in the HBCUs and other colleges and universities, they can't get in either. And we've got almost 4 million total coming out of college this year into this market that we are fighting to have jobs, good jobs in. And now our HBCUs are graduating. All of these people in STEM, they have nowhere to go. Nowhere. They're going to end up just like us, or just like me, fighting.
Let's go to Renaissance Man. He has his hand raised. Go to Dr. Phoenix.
Now, I was just going to quickly add one thing that I thought was interesting, just from my experience with business and international businesses. You have countries like Canada, which is very progressive, and when we've done business with them, we've had basically people that we've been expats trying to come into the country, and they would literally get stopped at the Canadian border by the border patrol, like, "Hey, why are you coming into the country?" Like, and they're just really big on making sure that if you're going to put a job in Canada, that you're not taking it away, or going to take a job in Canada, that you're not going to take it away from a Canadian citizen. And that was just kind of eye opening to me that, even a nation as progressive as Canada very much has a policy that makes sure that, immigrants don't come and take jobs from natural citizens. And it's just interesting the U.S. doesn't have that same mentality.
Yeah. Let's go to Dr. Phoenix.
Good evening. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, bro.
I just want to add something to what Vivian was saying, because this is a great article, because it actually highlights some stuff I've talked about in the past. And really what this article really highlights is this is how your universities hustle. This is what they do. They get students and they hire students, especially students at the graduate level, even at the undergrad level to a lesser extent, but mostly at that graduate and doctoral level. They hire them. So if you're income PhD student, the first thing you're doing is trying to get stipends and funding and stuff like that. So typically your stipend is usually funded the university. So they can be anywhere between, it depends on the university, but your private universities like Harvard and stuff like that, they pay more, but on average, you can expect somewhere around $20,000 to $30,000 a year for a stipend. And if you're a student, you might be in one of these programs that can last anywhere from 4 to 7 years in some cases. And so, and you get health insurance and stuff like that. But the point is that what the article highlighted was about firing these folks that have been in these positions for many years. That is the fundamental problem, especially when it comes to STEM, like engineering, where you have folks who are in these positions, they basically die in these positions. They've been, so you have all these new grads who are going in, who are maybe newly graduate PhD students, for example. They can't get into a teaching position that leads to tenureship, because you got all these old bastards that are 50, 60, 70 some years old, and they won't retire. And there's no limit. They can stay in those positions till they die for the most part.
Same thing with the federal government. I apologize for interrupting, but same thing with the federal government.
You're absolutely correct. And so this is how they get caught up in that postdoc track, because what happens is that all these postdocs, they get stuck in this never-ending cycle of doing postdoc after postdoc after postdoc. And these postdocs only pay anywhere between 40, if you're lucky, maybe 60. And they don't pay nothing. So meanwhile, you end up doing all this research from some senior scientist or whatever. And basically all that research you're doing that should be under your name, but you're doing it as a postdoc or even a student, the school is getting credit for it, because when you become a graduate student, if you're in a master's program that involves research, or you're in a PhD program, you have to sign you have to sign these waivers where basically any research you do is property of the school. It's not yours. You don't own it.
Yep. I have a friend who's doing that right now, and he said the exact same thing. Any sort of research you do with the school, you basically lose your rights to it.
Yeah. So if you come up with some groundbreaking whatever, it belongs, that idea, it might have been your work, it might have been your idea, your genius that led to it, but it's the school's property. They have property, they have rights to it. You cannot republish it. You cannot do none of that. And so, something that was told to me years ago by a mentor was that save your best ideas for when you're not a student. That's what I was told, because this is how schools make their money. This is how you have these big, what they call R1 Research One institutions. So there's about 150 of them. So basically most of your major state universities, they're in it. You got your Harvards, your John Hopkins, your Yales, your Rices, your Emorys and stuff like that. They're all up in Northwestern. They're all up in the mix. But there's about 150 so of these schools these are your top tier research institutions in the country. And so these schools make their money off of this never-ending train of postdocs, graduate students, and even undergrads to a lesser extent. This kind of goes back to when I talked about I was a McNair student because I was a McNair scholar in undergrad, because this is how you get introduced into that whole research process, really, because you have to be mentored into this. It's not something you just kind of do. No, you have to be mentored in this, which means you have to have those relationships with professors, and those professors in turn have relationships with whatever industry you're in, and that's what creates that bottleneck that was being discussed in that article.
Amazing. You know, the rabbit hole goes real deep with this, and so, you know, some people, want to say that, a company's, looking out for their best interest. This university is looking out for their best interest. Well, their best interest means that other people are compromised in this country that look just like you. As long as you got a job, you're okay though, right?
Well, yeah, that's interesting, because the other part of that, Mike, is that this, there's this revolving door between the university, between academia and industry. So a lot of the senior scientists, your senior professors, your tenure professors, these folks work in industry too. Many of them write books. That's why they love postdocs and graduate students. That's why they love them, because they get to do all the grunt work for their research, while they get to focus on writing the books, that make them the big bucks. They can go write textbooks. They can go and consult. They can do consulting. They can go on lecture circuits. They can do all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And they get that gets freed up to them, because you have this never-ending army of graduate students and postdocs and PhD students who do all this grunt work, who never get any credit, and you literally get paid pennies. They have to give you health insurance, because you're considered a full-time employee if you're if you're PhD student, you're considered a full-time employee. So you have to get along with your funding and your stipend, you have to get health insurance. They have to provide you health insurance.
If I can just say one thing to Dr. Phoenix, I wanted to let you know that we are definitely fighting the J1 system. It has been added to the H1B for the, the, can't remember the word, but Trump put an executive order out for the H1Bs to stop them from coming in the country under the epidemic. He's looking at extending it. The reason why it was supposed to be extended like a week ago, but the reason why they have not extended it, of course, Jared Kushner, I can knock him out, but also because they have added J1 for the doctors, and they're looking at the J1s because they have flooded the market with all of these doctors with these J1s. And they're trying to figure out what to do about it, because not only that, but the Chinese have been stealing from the universities. And one of the ways that they've been doing it is through the J1 program. So I wanted to let you know that Trump is definitely aware of that. The Trump administration is aware of it.
Yeah, actually, as it pertains to physicians practicing here in the U.S., I've talked about this on a number of other occasions, but about a third of all practicing physicians are immigrants. They came here on those on visas. And
yes, they did.
And so what happens is that you get a number of students. I mean, this is true of even American students, because most American pre-meds that apply to medical school, only about 40% of them are going to get accepted in any given cycle. So roughly about 60% of them are going to end up either going through other cycles and applying, or they're going to go to an international medical school, which are, and so what happens is that when you factor in those students, that they only account for somewhere around 5,000 to 6,000 or so incoming residents every year. But the bulk of the new incoming residents for residents are actually immigrants, and they come on these visas. They get sponsored by these companies and stuff and such like that. And so essentially what happened, the AMA they've been fighting this for years, the AMA, the American Medical Association, because what happens is that it creates this competition, so companies can bring them in, pay these immigrant doctors less, which in turn lowers the salaries for all physicians. And so AMA has been fighting this for years, because this has been a major problem. And so this is all a hustle. One part, this social thing that involves sort of we're going to use these folks as a buffer against Black people. And then the other part is that big business, corporate America uses it as a way to kind of keep wages low in general for among all positions.
Yeah, definitely. I just wanted to hit this one last piece. Just from Wired, I think we went over it earlier the week. What Atlanta can teach about cultivating Black talent. The city is rich in opportunity for African Americans who are largely underrepresented in the industry. It's also poised to become a hotbed for AI innovation. Yeah, this is true. We've gone over this before. Atlanta has done immense work in building out their Black tech sector. Not from a, you work for somebody else, but supporting entrepreneurship and in tech. And so it's a template that most cities can actually replicate. And again, what Google did with that $175 million, that's the sort of money that it would take to really get something like that off the ground fully and have it fully owned by, fully controlled by Black people. I've talked about this before, creating tech incubators and stuff like that in black communities across America, Black neighborhoods across America, and that would be a staple in public spaces. Okay, same way they fund public parks and zoos and museums and stuff like that. That same money could actually be used to create a Black tech incubator. And now is the time to actually start pushing for that. Okay, if these organizations don't want to hire Black people in terms of their D&I initiatives, fine. You keep your D&I initiatives, and we'll take $200 million and we'll build out our tech sector in these neighborhoods, and then we won't have to talk to you about anything anymore. How about that? We got Nagone 11 on the panel.
Yo.
Hey, what's going on, fellas? What's going on?
What's going on, man?
Hello.
Hey,
What's
how
up,
you doing?
Nagone?
What's going on, fellas? What's going on, man? What's going on, fam?
How you
Yeah,
doing,
man.
brother?
Good. But yeah, you guys right. Developing tech sectors. That's pretty important. I know they're trying to do that here in Harlem, in the city here. They did talk about the whole Harlem, Silicon Harlem, and all. And I'm getting a little bit more information on it, and it seems like they're also, as interesting as it might seem, this is for Black students, but since you have a lot of white folks coming into Harlem now they got some white kids coming into these programs, which I find rather interesting. So now Harlem is, for everyone, and everybody wants to be there, and the Mzungus are there as well. So they're really trying to push a lot of tech, but it is still Black focused. But even some of the more wealthier white people who are coming into Harlem right now want their kids to go to some of these programs and schools as well. Now they do have things kind of shut down right now in Harlem at this stage in the city, just because of the whole pandemic piece. But when this thing opens up, they really are looking to push that a lot more, and the whole tech incubators and tech sector they really want to try to nurture that as well. So this is something that I think we're going to see a lot more of, just developing all around in certain areas of the country, and California, maybe LA, certainly New York, Atlanta, definitely so, and other places that I'm hearing about. But this is big. I mean, this is something that we're going to see, increase a lot more in the future. That's for sure.
Yeah. I want to go over this last piece too, because somebody asked me about this the other day. Europe. What Europe is an organization that brings Black people into these big organizations through training and internship. So to start a career, hire a star. We bring talented young adults and top companies together to launch careers, power business, and build community. Europe is an example of understanding that the discrimination is real. Okay. Some people want to run around and say, well, it's not really that they're discriminating against Black people. Maybe there's just not enough Black talent. No, that's not the case. It's not the case.
So does this take people from like
low income areas and
already in college, or not even? You don't even have to be a college student.
you don't have to be a college student. So you
Okay.
have to come from a low income area. 6 months of training, 6 months of internship. So I call it year up. So that's the year that you fulfill.
Okay, so basically trying to bridge that gap on basically social capital.
Yes.
People who lack it because of you know, unfortunately where they were born.
Right, network poor, right? And so now it's a lot more colorful than what it was when I was younger. When I was younger, there was nothing but Black people in there. But now you have all these people involved in it. But part of the issue is that the main concern is that, well, these organizations are overlooking these Black candidates. Well, yeah, they're going to do that because racism is part and parcel to the American fabric, man. That's the way it is. But now these companies are talking about D&I, diversity and inclusion. Well, that's where Europe was ahead of the curve on this. Okay, I'm not a member or anything like that. I'm just using this as an example that they have had these discussions. I remember this 20 years ago, they were having these discussions, and trying to get Black people into IT. And well, how did they get in there, right? There was this constant cyclical rate of hiring nothing but white employees, white candidates, and keeping Black people out. And they said, oh, well, it just wasn't a cultural fit. And it was all BS. At the end of the day, it was all BS.
But you're going to have to, I think the other thing is with the demographic changes, there's going to have to be forced change now, because if you don't get the change now, you're going to have a real it's going to be a real fallout in say 20 years when these kids who are, being born now are getting ready to enter the workforce, and the majority of them aren't white. And you look at these companies and, you have all these executives, it's just going to create a disaster. So you got to get it right now.
That's exactly correct. That's an excellent point you just bring up, because they're going to have to move and gear more towards the future, and they're cutting it back by being racist. This is the short-sightedness of where a lot of these people are coming from. They're not looking at the long term, but we have to look at the long term more so, because these guys are just cutting their own throats. So at the end of the day, that's why we have to be very forthright and really be upfront and really push a lot of this tech and moving into these sectors aggressively now, because that's exactly what's going to happen as far as, what the needs are going to be in 20 and 30 years from now. It's not going to be as mayonnaise as a lot of these guys are fighting against now. This is kind of their last grasp when they're going ham right now. But this is what they're fighting against. What they're fighting against is what's going to happen 30 years down, 20 years down the line, the next generation. This is what they're fighting against now. And you ain't holding back the dawn, man. So that's why we've got to really push and really stay strong in this tech sector, because this is where the game is going to be. So it's there now, and it's going to be there certainly very strong 20, 30 years from now, even bigger and badder than it is now. And it's big and bad right now.
You know what's stunning, everyone, as I hear all of you talk about all of these subjects, is that white America, and I'm pretty, how can I say, tuned in. They have accepted me with open arms as Black America. But it's stunning to hear them talk about how they've been shut out of IT, and all of these people are being fired in order to bring all these India folks and Chinese folks, H-1B and all that other stuff, OPT. And for them to realize, they are realizing that what they practiced on Black America for so many years is now coming to bite them in the tail.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, hey, they took over HR years ago and kept us out, excluded us.
Right.
And that's in every aspect of a company.
Mm-hmm.
And now in IT, they're being cut out. But not only in IT, they've moved it up. HR, accounting, they've moved it into the whole realm of the company. So now white America is being shut out. And they're reaching out saying, oh my goodness, it's not a white America or the way we did Black folks, but now it's a national issue. It's a US citizen, a national versus everyone else. and they are looking for Black America. Like, okay, we know we did this to you, so it's doubly hard for you guys.
Yeah.
Well,
And they
I would like to say.
wouldn't
No. Go ahead, Mike, because
Go
I
ahead.
guess I want to say something. Matthew, go ahead.
No, go right ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say, you know, I have a machine learning position right now, and I've got some other technical spots that I'm actually working on and trying to fill currently. In fact, I'm actually working on them right now. But I am getting a lot of Chinese, Indians. I have one Black person. I have two white guys, and their resumes suck. And what I'm looking at is these guys ain't that good. They're not a lot of a lot of these white guys in the tech sector, the ones who were really good, the white guys who were really good in the tech game, they don't have any problems. People are bending over backwards, literally doing the Cirque du Soleil to get them in. And these guys are, they're contortionists to get these guys rolling. And I see this because I'm kind of at the placement level of this. So I see where the white dudes are definitely getting, they're getting game. They got game going on. For the few that are very good, you got a lot of these guys who suck, and they're out here sucking. They're expecting just because I've got the complexion for the connection that it should work, and it's not working that way for them. I think that's what we're seeing. A lot of guys who may not be that good, and they're expecting to get hired, and you got to deal with tech tests and everything else like that, and they're coming in, they're getting teched out, and they're not that good. And they're a bunch of some young Indian guy, or some Chinese guy. And these guys, at a certain level, some of the Indians, they throw a lot out here, but the Indians at the top level are very good. These Chinese cats who are coming in here, who are on top of their technical game, are very good. I will have to say this: the few brothers that I see who come rolling through, who really have strong backgrounds in a lot of areas, they're very, very good. And you do see some white cats who come through, but I don't see that many. And they're complaining because I don't think that they have that original inside track that they used to have. Just because I'm a white guy, show up, I'm entitled to the job, maybe I should get hired. It's not happening that way, especially when you're getting in some of these areas where you're getting teched out, and you're going through tech interviews and everything else like that. So people are really looking at your experience and your skill sets, and they're just not looking at your resume. Now you're sitting in front of a team lead or a tech lead, and and the tech and the manager, and then you might have to do a computer test as well. They may put you on the computer and see if you're coding and how your code looks and so forth, or they may give you a problem to solve. There's a lot more shit. It's a more competitive game, and what I think we're seeing, from what I've been experiencing since the early 2000s, is a lot of these cats are not teching out well. They're not showing up. They're not showing up properly. And I see from what I'm seeing from, they're getting a little bit tight because that complexion for the connection was not working for them anymore. Now you've got to compete, and that's why you see a lot of crying and whining and beefing, especially from the Mzungu. That's what we're seeing a lot of. I'm seeing that. I'm seeing that on the ground. Mike, go ahead, Mike. What are you gonna say?
No, I was just going to say that a lot of Richard Spencer said in 2016 that Silicon Valley is mostly Asian, and he's really talking about Indians and Chinese people taking up a lot of the IT roles. We need these good IT roles for white men. This sort of entitlement that he feels that white males should have access to these jobs. But in reality, it was white men who had access to those jobs. The only problem is that white men didn't want to do the laborers' work. They wanted to be in the managerial position, above the sea level. They wanted to be in the sea level. And so a lot of your most innovative roles, it's going to come from somewhere else from a demographic perspective, because a lot of those, Mzungas are not actually going for, the more code written, codable jobs, IT as code and stuff like that. They're not really going for that. And so the idea that because I'm a Mazunga, I'm entitled to be sort of, that's where the disgruntledness is coming from. I agree.
That's right.
Going 11 when he's saying that Mazungas are angry because just at the idea that somebody else is getting that role over them is what's making them angry. Whereas Black people are angry because they're not even getting the chance to even get the interview. Okay, they're being denied. They're getting their applications rejected in these sort of HR systems that go into this sort of black box that no one really knows what the criteria is to accept or reject a candidate. Now, what they found a few years ago, and I think this was Europe that may have found this out, they're actually discriminating based on zip code. Okay.
No, that's
so
interesting.
If your zip code goes back to a low income area that has low education and stuff like that, then that's enough for them to actually the HR system to reject you from a role. And so what happens to Black people? Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I've heard that same trend, and I'm sure Dr. Phoenix can speak on this. I've heard my aunt's a nurse, and she sort of echoed that same sentiment with medical school, is that you're seeing less of them getting into medical school as well. So multiple fields, tech as well.
Go ahead, Dr. Phoenix.
No, I was just going to say, Renaissance Man is absolutely correct. So basically, I mean, they do this. It's not just with medical school admissions, but it's kind of across the board for many of these health professions. But when it comes to for example, health departments and such like that, they have people grouped by what we call SES, socioeconomic status. And so they have certain zip codes of people and they group them. And so within these zip codes, you know exactly what's going on with people, whether you have low education attainment, what kinds of health issues are present, whether those areas are, low income, whatever the case may be. They're already, all this data is shared among all these, various institutions. But, to something that was said earlier, I'm a big proponent of ships because again, that's how I got into where I'm at. That's how I got to where I'm at now. Just through mentoring and internships. Internships and professions are the gateways to that corporate world. That's really what helps you move up that ladder. And so, I'm just a big proponent of that. And I know you talked about year one, I think it was, the year one. And I know you talked about that before. And I'm like, again, I'm a big proponent of it. But again, the problem is trying to get talent into those positions and have a constant pipeline element to that. So that's kind of where the disconnect is, at least from what I'm seeing. Anybody there?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
I don't know.
No, I was going to say, Dr. I think he's on mute.
Okay.
I was going to ask you, Dr. Phoenix, wasn't that you saying like medical school, like here in the US, you're seeing like what, 30% of the medical students getting in are like Asians?
Oh, no, it's higher than that. Yeah, 30% is about the chance that a Black student has to get in to medical school. On average, somewhere around, on average, about closer to about 40 to 45% of students that get accepted to medical school are Asian.
And that's even at like HBCUs too, like a Howard or a Meharry.
I don't know if anybody here HBCU graduate, but I'm gonna say something from a gentleman that I know that went to probably the most famous HBCU in this country. What he told me when I applied to medical school, he told me don't apply there.
Wow, really?
Yep, because he was there. He went to school with Kamala Harris. He went to school with Kamala Harris and Isaiah Washington, if anyone's familiar with those two. But when he went there, he would, he kind of gave me the lowdown on what happens at the HBCU medical school. So the major one that I'm talking about in general, this one, they're very infamous for accepting students of Jewish descent because Jews provide a lot of the major funding to this particular HBCUs. And so, and specifically, they provide a lot of funding to their medical school. And so if you were to look at their medical school yearbook, you you will see quite a few students that are Jewish.
There are two medical schools that I know of because I had one of my fraternity brothers. He went to Fisk, Meharry Medical, and
Yep.
and then over and then I have another one who was in DC, went to Howard, and it seemed like those trends were kind of going there. Jews and Indians, black brothers was getting in. Now, I ain't gonna front. Brothers were getting into medical school, but they did, especially during the time when I was going to school. Brothers were definitely getting in, but you had you definitely had the Jews and you had Indians rolling pretty strong. At
you
that,
want to hear something funny? Go ahead, continue, Rob. You just made me think.
No. It's just what I saw, and I thought it was very interesting. And we're going back 30 years. So yeah, that was trending then.
If when I was looking at medical schools, and I was when I was kind of getting my list together of schools that I was going to apply to, I went to. I'm just gonna put it out there. I went to Morehouse's medical school website because it was one of the schools I had considered applying to. And when you go to their website, I don't know if they changed it now, but I can tell you now, for a number of years, if you go there, if you go to their web, and you go to the actual medical school website, not the actual school website, but their medical school website, you go to the part where it talks about applying and admissions and all of that. There was actually a picture of a white male holding an anatomy book on the web page of an HBCU. And I think when I saw that completely turned me off.
Well, the HBCUs, they have real issues. It's about funding. It's about money. Like absolutely. University and some of the other schools that are HB, they don't, they dorms didn't have proper heating in there and all kind of stuff. So, I mean, it's a money thing with a lot of these with a lot of these historically black colleges. It's a money piece. It's a money thing. And
they've been chronically underfunded.
They're going to the money. It's effed up, but I'm not agreeing with all what's going on, but I do know in order to keep these institutions open, it takes a lot of frog skins to keep them going. So that's going to play a role.
No, I was gonna say you're right. That's kind of an area where we as Black Americans kind of got to step it up a little bit in the sense of I know Roland Martin's real big on trying to raise money for HBCUs and raising money to donate because he was just talking about how low the rate of donation is from alumni. So you could just
that's funny because I don't know if I did talk about that because I swear, man, I get like letters like every damn month from my alma mater about donating. But I know every HBCU student I met and folks that I've known who've gone to some of these HBCUs, they've all talked about it. And certainly I observed that where they don't have an alumni system that is really engaged and active in the school and promoting the school and more importantly raising money and donating to the school. And this kind of goes into the discussion that Mike had last week when we kind of talked about those legacy admissions for medical schools and how I talked about this is how you get those legacy admissions. Your parents went to University of Michigan's medical school in Ann Arbor, and so they're on the alumni. They donate. Your dad's a top neurosurgeon, and he's giving a couple $100,000 a year, whatever, to the school. And so this is how they create these never-ending pipelines. This is how these damn state schools are so large because they have excellent alumni systems where the alumni are very much engaged in promoting the school and donating to the school and stuff like that. So this is where HBCUs have failed. You need to find students and people who are really dedicated to the outcome of the school.
Yep. No, and I was at graduation. They literally had the dean up there already getting people trying to literally donate to the alumni association. So they're on top of it.
I mean, you do have that. I mean, some of the prestigious medical school, the prestigious black ones like Meharry, and how, you do have some very famous people, doctors who or in their fields who are there and they do give money and all that. But they're taking money from a lot of different places. And the whites do understand that. This was some years ago. I actually got into a debate with a Jewish kid. He was like, well, we don't know about the medical schools that are so great. We don't know if black medical schools are so great. Some Jewish boy was trying to tell me that. And I says, well, you certainly got enough of you guys sitting down there. I see quite a few Star David sitting up in that piece. What you talking about? Why are they going to? Why are they going to the schools? Why are they going to schools? Well, what? Because they're Ashkenazi? What's up? What's up?
Nah, they go to the schools because they're cheaper.
They're there, but we got to go to an American medical. Oh, so it's an American medical school, so it's better to come out of American one than a foreign one, right? Is that basically what you're saying? But they're in there. He sat down, turned red, shut his mouth, didn't have anything else to say. But they still trying to diss you, but yet going to your schools.
Gentlemen, if I could say something right quick, actually 3 points. Number one, I'm an HBCU biology pre-med with a minor in chemistry. Number two, yes, there was a gentleman last week, African-American, who was who was being interviewed by Michelle Malkin. And he mentioned that he is $350,000 in debt and he currently works for Uber. Number three, the HBCUs, one of the blessed things that the Trump administration did was actually give recurring money to the HBCUs, because he stated that the other schools, the Yale, Harvard, Princeton, all those good folks were getting those grants automatically and have been getting them for 100 years and building up their labs and all those good stuff for the STEM program. And the HBCUs were not getting grants to have continuous work for the students and the alumni and all that good stuff. So one of the things that continuous money that he's providing on a yearly basis actually brings to the forefront the federal government contracting with the HBCUs in their lab departments to begin to work on all kinds of things. So I wanted to state that was actually a good thing. And I'm still mad at Obama for turning it down all those years. He should have did that years ago, turkey. Okay.
Yeah.
No, and that is a good point. That is a good point. I think part of it is that these larger schools and these larger school systems, they were kind of that previous article that you brings into these schools. It's the amount of research that these students are doing and these professors are doing. And so this is what brings money into the school and also what gives them their prestige and their notoriety, because in turn, these programs, these departments end up applying for NIH funding, they apply for funding through NSF and stuff like that. And so this is what brings millions and millions of dollars into these departments, into these schools and whatever. So a huge chunk of the money that comes into these schools is not just private, as like if you were dealing with Harvard and like that, but also a lot of it is federal dollars that coming from these major institutions like the NIH or the NSF or something like that.
For sure.
And so a lot of your HBCUs, they typically do not get that kind of funding. So that's why you needed that additional federal support to bolster their science programs, to bolster the build up of their labs and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's
and patent access, patents.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. But what bothered me, man, was how they went after Bill Cosby after he had donated, all that money to the HBCUs, and then they took his name down after he came out, with this rather dubious attack on him. And boy, he gave a lot of money to to the historically Black colleges. He gave a lot of money there. I would like to see some of these other guys step up and do the same, because we do have some very wealthy people in our community who certainly could do a lot more for them as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know about medical schools or other schools, but I know like business schools in general, even the elites, the Harvards and the Yales, they've been seeing decreasing applications to their business schools. So I don't know if that's trickling down across all academic programs for graduate programs, but that's another sort of source of funding that goes away if less people applying and application fees and less people actually enrolling. So.
That's a fact, and because it's the cost of these educations. I mean, if you're going to go to a medical school today regardless HSCU or wherever, you are looking at 200 grand or close to $200,000 coming out of there. Just coming out of a school like that. That's a lot of frog skins. You know what I mean? Some that are even more prestigious, more expensive, even more than that. So cost of a medical school education to go to medical schools very high. I mean, there's money's out there for you, but it's high. It's definitely costly. So I think that's becoming now a bit more prohibitive, and the way these costs are going up, they're going to have to do something. So we'll be interested to see what happens there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I will also add too that when you're talking about these MBA programs and such, if you go to these elite schools like Wharton and stuff like that, these programs cost about 150 grand. For these 2-year programs or however long they are.
Easily.
Yeah. And so unless you're going to, and typically the elite programs usually have connections in industry, so they can funnel graduates into whatever positions within those industries or whatever. But if you're going to just like to maybe some lesser known state school or whatever, you could end up paying almost similar amounts for a graduate degree. Actually, you will. But the problem is that, again, so much of the funding and so much of the debt that students incur along the way, it goes back to the previous article where you talked about these postdocs. If you can't get a job as a newly graduated PhD, you just end up doing postdocs indefinitely because they pay you a little something, and then you might get some insurance, some health insurance along the way.
Or you end up as an Uber
there's
driver.
A lot of business. There's a lot of business to that PhD stuff, because it really comes down to what are the hot studies, where you're going to go. It's big. Yeah. That's a big thing. It's about the money on that. It's about the money where you go after that, because you get certain PhDs, they ain't no money. But certain other areas, if you're going to go to the LHC and go to CERN and get involved in that type of stuff, that's big money there. So it's so much depends on where you're going, man. It's about the money with the PhD. It's about the bread. It's terrible to say that, but it is.
I do want to add something because I know this.
I don't know. Vivian, did you want to say something?
I think she had something.
I was just saying that, or you end up as an Uber driver or work at a restaurant. I mean, it's horrible out here.
Yeah, I know she has not been able to pass her step 2, but she currently has about 400 grand in debt, and she has to drive Uber, and she has an internship while she studies to pass her step 2. And the problem is, when you go to medical school, this is a high stakes game. You don't get a chance. You do not mess up, because if you mess up, the cost is high. The price you pay is high. And if you don't pass your boards, so you don't pass step 1 and step 2, because you take those both in med while you're in med school, those can potentially bar you from ever getting a residency ever.
Well, the boards depend on where you're going to go, man. If you're going to get into one of those high-end practices fields, you got to knock those boards out the box.
Well, they changed the board. They changed step 1 scoring system. So starting in 2022, it won't be a 3-digit number score anymore. It'd just be a pass or fail. So typically, this is what residency directors programs. This is what they really base your viability as a candidate for a residency position on, was that step 1 score. So typically, if you wanted to go into something like, let's say, ophthalmology, you needed somewhere around a 250, 260 on the step 1.
Yeah.
But now it's a pass or fail. So a lot of it now is going to come down to whether or not, what are you able to do? Are you getting good marks in your courses and stuff?
That's like right. That's what they're going to judge that.
Rotations alike, but now they've done away with that, so it makes it a little easier for students. But again, it's still a high stakes game. You don't want to fail those types of exams, because those exams, because they show up when you fail. When you go through those residency applications, they will know, and it will potentially be a reason for them to not even consider you for a residency. So
you have to be a rockhead to go in there and fail those exams. That's like the worst. That's like the worst thing to do. Wow. Anyway.
Yeah, but something else that kind of bothered me a little bit, because I know talking about the tech and the lack of oh my God, I forgot the term here.
Diversity.
Yeah, diversity, and in tech. And I don't think there was a lot of talk about the biotech companies, because I think if you want to see something that's really homogenous, is biotech.
Yep.
And biotech is one of the most homogenous industries out there. I mean, you can find Black folks doing some, just, your usual IT, computer science, computer engineering, stuff like that. You can find Black folks doing that. But in biotech, we're talking about folks who are geneticists, bioinformaticists, stuff like that. You don't find those folks, because a lot of times what happens is that you get a pipeline of folks that were either physicians or nurses, specifically nurses with doctorate, with PhDs, who go into biotech, who might be like MSLs, medical science liaisons and stuff like that, or they even go into on the tech side where they work in IT, they do bioinformatics or something like that, or they do informatics, or like I've talked about this before, where Microsoft, one of the principal architects of their new AI initiative they have, is actually ran by their chief nursing officer, who she spoke at South by Southwest about a year or two ago. And again, this is the area where it is really homogenous, where you only will see white folks.
But something funny? I had a friend. He was going. He was older, so he did extremely well in his classes. And he was going actually out to Arizona or ASU, and very high grades he got. He was an older student, and came out summa cum laude. And he had close to 4.0 average in all of his science classes. He had 4.0s. And one of his professors in genetics said, you need to go into biotech or go into genetics. He says, this is where you should be putting your time. You're trying to become a physician's assistant. She's like, with your skills and your knowledge, you kind of wasting your time. He didn't really want to hear that, but that's what he heard. And that's where they would tell him to go. So, and this professor was telling him to go right there. He's telling him with his grades. I mean, nothing but A's. And that's what you're saying. Don't waste your time doing that. She actually thought going into being a physicist was a waste of time. You need to get into research. You need to get into biomedical sciences or genetics. These areas.
The PA profession is pretty much white female dominated.
It's white, young, and it's young girls. Yeah,
it's young. We're talking.
I call them chickadees.
24,
they got chickadees
25.
Yeah, the chickadees. Yeah, that's what they got up in there. Yeah, for real. So it is. Yeah. So they were saying, what are you doing, man? Don't waste time with that. So, and he got rejected. He got rejected from AP still,
Oh, really?
He got rejected with with basically close to 4.0 average, which I couldn't believe. And, and when he walked in there and he did, because I did the whole interview prep for him and the whole deal, and we thought we were really prepped up. And, he walked in, he said, yeah, my grades are, she said, well, grades are not the most important thing, and she was real terse with him. And,
really?
Yeah, it was really terse with him, man. It was terse with the man, terse. And, get basically, he kind of, the color wasn't right, and the age wasn't right. So, and the sex wasn't right. So, he was blowing these other kids away on grades, but they didn't want them because they wanted really kind of young white chicks, man. And I guess if you were a young Hispanic or young Black girl as well with those kind of grades, you would have got in as well. I certainly do believe. But for him that wasn't going to work. But 4.0 average, man. 4.0 average in the sciences, or 3.96 or something in the science average. It was crazy. So and he got rejected. I've never heard that before.
I want to throw this story out here to folks just to show you just how homogenous this stuff is in the biotech sector. So Vanderbilt University in Tennessee, in Nashville, they have partnerships with Meharry, but so about, I don't want to say about 7 years ago, they had their first Black graduate of their genetics program. Now, this program has been around for many, many years. Their first Black PhD graduate of their genetics program. Black female. Now, she currently works, I want to say it's with Genentech, which is based out of San Francisco. They're over in that Silicon Valley area. and she works as a bioinformaticist. I think her name was Janine something. I can't remember her last name. It was Janine something. But I came across her story about a couple years ago when I was just kind of doing some research and just kind of found out like, damn, because when I was considering doing maybe a PhD at one point, you know, I was looking at stuff like that. And then and then I came across the story. I'm like, because Vanderbilt was one of the schools I had intended to apply to at that time. And it was just like, I couldn't believe it. Like all these years and all that, we still having to deal with this idea of you're the first here or you're the first there. And this goes to the very heart of the problem here is that when you don't, when there's no investment and you don't have this viable network of experts and professors and people in industry that can facilitate getting Black talent into these positions, you get these, this is where you get these problems where stuff becomes like charity. They just bring you in because you're the token. Oh, we had to do this. And more often than not, Black folks in these positions get tokenized.
Yeah, no, I'll never forget when I was listening to when I first came across Boyce Watkins, and he talked about when he graduated with his PhD in finance, he was the only Black person in America that did that year. I was like, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a chance to talk to Boyce Watkins. I met him a couple years ago in Atlanta, and him and I talked for a few minutes about that. And it was actually a very interesting story, you know. And the fact is that, for him, this was, many years ago. And even now in my time, we're still seeing the same issue where, oh, this Black person is the first of this. Oh, I think I'm trying to remember, I think it was MIT last year, I believe, had their first Black graduate of a PhD in nuclear engineering. It was a Black female.
Yep.
Oh, wow. They just had their first Black valedictorian this year.
Yeah, I was reading that story too. I mean, this is what's going on. And so, we still have this problem where, everyone loves to claim diversity because, again, they get to hit these quotas because they get all this extra funding from the government and stuff like that by saying, yes, we hit this quota, we got these certain number of folks. And I just want to make it really clear, we got to be careful when they put out these statistics where they say, oh, well, yeah, Black folks are 1% of what, 1% of whatever within this industry, but then but they comprise about 20, but Black and Latinos comprise about 20% of all graduates, and I think it was computer science in that earlier article that Mike was reading.
Yeah.
But again, if Black people and Latinos are 20%, what percentage of them are actually Black? That's the problem.
I think the last time I checked the number, I think it was split. I think it's like pretty even, or if not, Blacks make a larger proportion of it. Black.
Because that's really the catch-22 right there, is where they group Black folks into with these other so-called minority groups. Yep. And Black folks, and our stories do not get told, and they get lost in this whole diversity talk. And so again, so we might say, yeah, we have this percentage of all these minority groups in there, because they're a group of Asians in, they're a group of East Indians in, because by numerically, yeah, they are a minority. But when you look at these high impact career fields, you look at these STEM fields, they are a huge percentage compared to their population size in this country. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at Black folks they're overrepresented in the service industry and all these low skill, low income industries. But yet when it comes to these high skill, highly educated industries, no, they're a very small percentage, and it's been like that from the very beginning. And that's by design. That is completely intentional.
Yeah, no, I've seen that at my job. I've seen more and more of people of color, and one person was bold enough to ask, like, hey, like, what is people of color? Is that like women, minority, like Black, like how are you grouping that together? And the guy was like, well, I got to go back to HR and ask them that. All
right, I think we have to leave it here. Thank you for all of you who contributed on the panel, and thank you to Vivian for sending those articles over. Much appreciated. And please hit the like button if you've not already done so, and share the video if possible. Shalom to everyone.